Good morning, everyone. I'm Lance Hummer, and I'm the Executive Director of the Keystone Community Education Council and co-chair, along with Deb Lutz, of the Northwest Pennsylvania Oil and Gas Hub Task Force. Just a quick overview of the task force. We've been in existence for now 10 years. Started with some showcases here at the time that we did that. It's when all the leasing was occurring and we were giving a lot of information out. We actually had about 2,000 people come to the showcases. To start off with, back in January, we held another summit, and our 3 state senators were the ones that pulled that together, helped us do that. That was Michelle Brooks, Scott Hutchison, and Dan Laughlin. And we're going to start this morning with just a little presentation from Scott.
Thank you, folks. It's a pleasure to be here. I thank you for coming out. This is an important opportunity for our northwestern Pennsylvania region. And as Lance said, we look at it regionally. And that's why the 3 senators, myself, Senator Brooks from Mercer, Crawford, and Erie counties, as well as Senator Laughlin from Erie County, all of us agree that this has such regional impact, and this is such a wonderful opportunity for those of us here in northwestern Pennsylvania to get on a fast-moving train and to grow and to prosper and to build our future. It's a pleasure to be part of this. Folks, before we get started, there is one other thing I wanted to do. It was 17 years ago, at about this time in the morning, that our country was under attack. And I think it would be appropriate for us to rise and have a moment of silence and then open with the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Again, it's an important moment for those of us here in northwestern Pennsylvania and in all of Pennsylvania, but we're particularly interested in growing and getting on this fast-moving train, as I said. It's also not only important for us to work together, it's important for us to plan together, to look at the bigger picture and see how we fit into each piece of that puzzle to build a prosperous region. And that's why I'm excited to see lots of business folks here today, folks who are entrepreneurs, who want to build their businesses, their growth plans as part of this energy and petrochemical revolution that's occurring right in our neighborhood. So that's why I'm especially excited to see you all today. And to remind you something that I've heard it many times, probably even heard Lance say this before, but failure to plan is planning to fail. And it's important for us to get together, to plan our future, to think about opportunities, to help each other reach those goals, and to make our communities stronger and more vitality and economically growing. So thank you for taking some time today to be part of this process of planning, this process of thinking about our future and learning where each of us, as whether it's business people or other agencies, fit into a bigger puzzle. I want to thank again the Oil and Gas Hub for their long time work on this and keeping this educational component moving forward also. So thank you, have a great day, and look forward to some great information as we move through the day. Thank you.
What we want to do real quickly is give you kind of an update of some of the things that are occurring. We wanted people to know that we are constantly active in working with the region. We have an exceptional lineup of speakers. I've heard the speakers in the past and really wanted to make sure that we all had the opportunity to hear what they have to say and to encourage us. But one of the first things that I wanted to do was have Jill Foy, who is the Executive Director of the Northwest Commission, talk about a initiative that they are just embarking on.
Thanks, Lance. Good morning, everyone. As Lance said, my name is Jill Foy, Executive Director of the Northwest Commission. I appreciate the opportunity to be with everyone today. Building on what the Senator said, this is about planning. This is about what's coming and how do we prepare for it. And we've been really fortunate to have a team approach to what's taking place next at the Northwest Commission. A few months ago, we started a conversation with Denise Brinley, who's here from DCED, as well as some partners locally, about how do we prepare, how do we know what's coming? It's a big question mark. So one of the things that we are looking at, when you look at the Northwest Commission's footprint, and you look at where the Beaver County plant is, there's about, if you look at a range from 50 miles out to 120 miles out, that's kind of where we lay as far as distance from the Beaver County plant. So we started having those conversations. How do we know what affects us directly and indirectly? So what we've done with assistance, and I wrote them down because there's so many partners that are getting involved in this. The hub is a partner, the Shenango Valley Enterprise Zone, the Northwest Pennsylvania Incubator Association. We're using our PREP dollars, our Partnership for Regional Economic Progress dollars, to have a study. And I know the study is the S word, but it really does position us well to look at other areas that are creating the same products. And with the help of Denise, we found 2 locations in Sarnia, Ontario, which ironically is about the same distance from the Northwest Pennsylvania region as is the Beaver County plant. Those plants came online about 2 years ago. So what we're going to do is look at that 50 miles to 120 miles out. What are those businesses in the supply chain or in the value-added chain? And how do they compare to the businesses that are here in Northwest Pennsylvania? So our RFP is actually going out today. We will have proposals back in the next month. We will be working with our steering committee, which is created of all those agencies that we just talked about. We're also going to have the private sector involved to really walk through this process with our consultants. We hope to have our study completed about spring of next year, and then really starting to engage with all of those partners, private and public sector, to be able to plan. What are those things, what are those businesses, who are those businesses that can take advantage right out of the gate? They are creating a product or a service that businesses in that same footprint are taking advantage of now. What are those businesses who can tweak what they're doing just the slightest bit and then take advantage? And what are those businesses that don't exist in our region right now? What are those ones that we need to attract or we need to develop? I've been in economic development for more years than I care to admit, but I've also seen the successes of growing from within. Attraction is not an easy thing, but most of our successes come from entrepreneurs who are growing from where they live. So how do we take advantage of that? So over the next several months, we're going to be working with our consultants. When I took this to my board of directors, one of my county commissioners who's in the room today said, okay, Jill, we're doing a study. What happened? Where is this study going to land? And is it going to sit on a shelf? Because that's the question every one of us asks with a study. And I said, that's up to us. That's up to those people who are participating. Those are up to those people that we're engaging. It's up to us to make sure that we're taking that information and getting it out to the people who can use it. So we're really excited about it. As we move forward, you'll hear more about it. We'll start engaging the private sector, the service providers, the education piece. Everything is intertwined, and you can't overlook one or you're going to miss an opportunity. So we're looking very forward to it, and I appreciate your time this morning.
Another thing that is happening, we have been working with the plastic industry, and the number one thing they were looking for was an apprenticeship program. They wanted an apprenticeship program for mid-level employees. They wanted to be able to move people from an entry level up to a plastic technician, which is more of a maintenance position. And we are now, this week, we hope that that'll be finally approved by the state. All indications are that that is going to happen. And then we also have, in that particular program, we have Clarion University and Ames, will be helping with the training of that. The lawyers were the ones that chose the trainers that they were looking for. So that's taken a bit of time, but to do that just for the plastic companies. One of the other initiatives that we're working on is one with the federal government, and that is hopefully soon to be announced. We aren't allowed to announce it just yet, but we're well on our way. And on that, I'm going to turn it over to Dan.
Thank you, Lance. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I'm Dan Weaver, President and Executive Director of PIOGA, Pennsylvania Independent Oil and Gas Association. And we're going to talk a little bit about how did we get to this point. And it's kind of interesting. We can't really figure out the future. As a history major, I was always one that studied the past, because that's going to kind of dictate where we're going in the future, because we all know the old adage, you know, if we don't study the past, it's doomed to repeat itself. Well, in some instances, that's not a bad thing, right? So let's go back to 1400s. Why the 1400s? Well, from about 6 miles from where we're standing, Native Americans were gathering this interesting substance off of Oil Creek. Obviously oil. We can carbon date the pits that they dug clear back to 1410. Now, they only came through, they were a traveling group of Native Americans. They came through mostly in the spring when the oil would naturally float up to the surface. And they would use it for, we don't know exactly, but we would think medicine, waterproofing, those type of things. So Pennsylvania has a long oil history. Then let's move forward to the 1800s. They were drilling salt wells. What did they need salt for at that time? Well, they were using it for curing meats and things along those lines, but they kept getting this substance in it that was ruining their salt, petroleum. And those salt wells were just outside of Pittsburgh. And so one of the salt well drillers and a couple other people got together. Edwin Drake was brought here in 1857 to figure out a more effective way to get oil out of the ground. And if you have an opportunity this afternoon, stop by the Drake Well Museum, about 6 miles from here. He had success on August 27th, 1859, only at 69.5 feet. And he had a well at that point in time. They didn't have a measurement as far as barrels, but was putting out around 200 gallons of oil a day. But that's all it took, was that one moment. And so from there, in 1859, by 1860, you had people coming into the valley. And you had boom towns going up, which were literally a town that would pop up overnight. By 1865, 67, you had some major towns that were producing 1/6 of the world's oil. And by 1870, we were sending Pennsylvanians all around the world to teach them how to drill. 1880s, you had the Bradford field kick off up around McKean County, up in that area, which is still one of the major oil producing zones. So that's oil. Where did natural gas come from? Obviously, it was 1872. There was always natural gas present, but the first real natural gas well was drilled, the Haymaker well in Murraysville, Pennsylvania, just east of Pittsburgh. And that was able to actually provide gas to the city of Pittsburgh. Okay, and so you have the two industries. You know, obviously the oil industry started first, then the natural gas industry. So we're going to transfer to start talking about natural gas now. So it was what it was. You know, Texas field took off in the turn of 1900s. You had Spindletop. And Pennsylvania, although it had a very important oil history, it just kind of was on a steady decline. We weren't producing as much as we once did. There was other wells that were more prolific. They were coming in at 100,000 barrels a day of oil. So Pennsylvania, although very important, kind of faded into the background. Until when? 2004. 2004, what happened then? Range Resources drilled a test well. They were actually trying to drill into the Onondaga and then Oriskany formations down there. And at that point in time, they had a dry hole. So they decided that they drilled through this formation called the Marcellus, which we've known about for a long time. We knew about it back in the 80s when we were drilling Trenton Black River wells over in Susquehanna, Bradford counties. There'd be this huge show of gas when you'd go through the Marcellus, and then a day or two later it would disappear. And everybody at the time would say, that's just shale gas, let's keep drilling. Boy, were we mistaken. So Range used this opportunity to say, hey, why don't we take this and turn this into a learning experience? So they did core samples of all the formations, and they sent this Marcellus sample down to their office in Texas. And Texas at that point in time had been drilling into some shale, mainly the Barnett. And they said, wow, that's really similar. It's very similar. All right, and so they're looking at this, there's this rich organic black shale. So why don't we drill into that? So they drilled the Wren's well in 2004, and it was a vertical Marcellus well. What we learned at that point in time is traditionally up here, our hydraulic stimulation jobs, known as a frac job, we didn't use a lot of water. We used a lot of nitrogen and a lot of sand, and that's what we used in our tight sand formations. That doesn't work in a shale play. You need water, and so they put what they call a Texas stimulation job on it, and the Marcellus was born. So that's 2004. By 2005, we had 115 wells drilled, and things were starting to take off. 2006 and 7, over 800 wells drilled, just that year. By 2012 into 13, we had, in that year alone, we had 3,900 wells drilled. But the biggest year was actually the year before, in 2010 into 11. We had over 4,200 wells drilled that year alone. So there was a bunch of wells being drilled. The maximum rig count at one time was in 2012. We had 114 drilling rigs turning across the state. And so we look at what's happened, right? The well count went down due to economics, right? Because we weren't producing, the gas prices fell. We bottomed the market out. We went from producing 1% of the nation's natural gas to currently we produce about 20%. If you look at the region, we produce a quarter or more within the region of the nation's natural gas. So we look at the peak and then the decline. In 16 and 17, we only drilled 2,200 wells. And in 16, we had 19 rigs. In 17, we had 33 rigs. We currently have 41 rigs turning in the state. And people are like, oh, it's still in a decline. We're still depressed. Yeah, economically, yes. However, what they're not taking into account is efficiencies. And that's the difference that people overlook a lot of times, is the fact that a well today, when we were drilling a horizontal back in 2012, it may take up to 30 days to complete a lateral, and those laterals may only be 5,000 feet long. Where are we reaching out to today? A lot of laterals are over 10,000 feet. I've seen a lateral that was pushing 15,000 feet. But most of them are 8 to 12,000 foot long laterals. And so we've tripled the length of the lateral, and we've reduced the time by half. So don't look at rig count. Don't allow that. Don't allow people to say, oh, the rig count's down. There's no activity, or it's limited activity. Yeah, that's partly it. But the fact of the matter is, it's not just economics, it's efficiency. Now, that is very sensitive as to what, there's a lot of outside sources that play in on this. Permits, how fast we can get those through. And there was a time where we struggled to get a lot of permits through the DEP. The DEP has been working on that, and they're doing a much better job at trying to get permits expedited through. So there's still a lot of challenges for the industry. The other thing we had to wait for, there's been over 16,825 wells drilled. Only 11,000 of those are active at this point in time. And the other thing we were waiting for was what? Takeaway, pipelines. If we can't get it to go anywhere, it doesn't, or we don't have the vessel to move it, it doesn't do us any good to keep drilling holes in the ground. Or if we don't have the takeaway on the other end of that pipeline for the gas to go somewhere, what's it going to do us any good to continue to drill those wells? So you're going to spend the rest of the afternoon kind of hearing about takeaway. You're going to hear about where's that, what are we going to do with this gas? What are we going to do with these resources that are here? What is the potential? So I'm proud to be involved with this group to help bring you up to date as to how did we get to this point, but I'm extremely excited to see what the possibilities are moving forward, and you have a great lineup of speakers through the rest of the day. So at this point in time, I think we're going to kick it off to your first set of speakers. So they're going to cover the economic impact of the chemical and plastic manufacturing in Appalachia. We have Martha Moore from the American Chemistry Council and Abby Foster from the PA Chemical Industrial Council. So at this point in time, I would like to turn it over to Martha and Abby.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here in Titusville. I've been doing energy economics for about 20 years now, and I'm very excited to spend the rest of my morning at the Drake Museum. It's been something I've wanted to do for a long time, and I finally have an opportunity to do it. I just want to open up with, yes, I'm from Washington, D.C., but my husband's from Parkersburg, West Virginia, so I have ties to this region. And I'm very excited to present to you some analysis that we've done on the potential for petrochemical and plastics manufacturing here in the region. Oh, thank you. Let me just kick it off with sort of a broad overview. I don't know that there's many here that are familiar with the chemical industry, but the chemical industry is incredibly energy intensive. Up to 70% of the production cost of making ethylene is energy. And not just the fuel and power, but also as feedstock. And it's even higher for some other materials. I've highlighted ethylene, which is a primary building block chemical, 27 million metric tons produced in the United States last year. Also linear or low-density polyethylene, linear low-density polyethylene, and high-density polyethylene, which are key derivative products that are made from that ethylene molecule. They're also very energy intensive. I've also highlighted propylene. Propylene can be made from propane via a new technology called propane dehydrogenation, which I think there's some potential for in this region as well. So the U.S. has become a leader in energy production. I believe that 1 month in the spring, we actually were the largest oil producer in the world. I think we just edged out Saudi Arabia and Russia. I think on an annual basis, we're set to overtake Russia next year in oil production. In gas production, we surpassed Russia several years ago as the world's largest producer of natural gas. And as you can see, on the oil side at least, our net imports of crude oil and petroleum products, refined petroleum products, is approaching zero. We're becoming self-sufficient in that area. So when we talk about chemicals and competitiveness of chemicals, if you remember nothing else I tell you today, I want you to remember this chart. This chart is showing the feedstock spread. In the world, generally there's two major petrochemical feedstocks to produce ethylene. There's naphtha, which is a refined petroleum product. It comes from petroleum refineries around the world, primarily used in Asia and Europe. In North America and also the Middle East, we primarily use natural gas liquids, in particular ethane, which comes from natural gas processing. So we look at the spread of the prices, the relative prices between naphtha, the petroleum-based product that's used in Asia and Europe, and ethane, which is which is consumed in North America. So when that spread is large, it's very advantageous for North American petrochemicals. When it's relatively small, as it was, you can see at the beginning part of the last decade, US petrochemicals are very uncompetitive on a global basis. I've been with the chemical industry now off and on for 25 years. 10 years ago, if I stood up here and said we were going to build a new ethylene plant in the United States, you would have laughed me out of the room. No kidding, it was very, very uncompetitive. People were mothballing capacity. And here we've got this totally new dynamic that we're working with. Thanks, Abby. So the feedstock spread is what really drives petrochemical competitiveness. We can look at the ratio of the price of oil, because naphtha is tightly correlated with the price of oil, and the price of natural gas. Here I'm using the Henry Hub benchmark because that's very strongly linked to the price of ethane. And we can look at futures markets, we can look at the Energy Information Administration produces forecasts, and we can look at what that ratio is going to look like over the next several years. So we've done sort of some analysis when the ratio of the price of oil, and here I'm using the Brent, the international benchmark, because remember, this is we're looking at what our competitors' cost structure is going to look like. So we're looking at the ratio of Brent to Henry Hub. When that ratio is above 7, US-based chemicals are competitive. When that ratio is below 7, we're relatively disadvantaged. And again, you can see the pattern at the early part of the decade. Last decade, we were in trouble, but you can see here we are in a very favorable position, and it looks to be favorable for the future. So this is a supply curve. It's a cost curve for ethylene production. Stacking the lowest cost ethylene production up to the highest cost ethylene production. And you can see that in 2005, the US was among the highest cost ethylene producers globally. Fast forward to 2017, the US is now in basically second position on this global cost curve. Right now, the Middle East, which also uses ethane, is currently the low-cost leader. But for those that are familiar with what's going on in the Middle East, the ethane allocations are going away. So new petrochemical facilities being built in the Middle East will not be able to use ethane. And the reason for this is their resource base is relatively dry. They don't have a lot of natural gas liquids content in their natural gas fields, as opposed to the Marcellus and the Utica and other fields here in the United States that are very rich in natural gas liquids. Which brings me to some data from EIA, looking at the production of ethane over the last several years. And you can see this beautiful orange wedge that represents Appalachia. By 2020, a quarter of US ethane production will be coming from this region. And this is just the gas that is being produced. I'm sorry, this is just the ethane that is being produced. There's a significant amount of ethane that is being left in the gas stream. So when natural gas, raw natural gas comes up out of the well, it contains methane, natural gas. It's when we turn our stoves on, that's what we see there. But it also contains a lot of these natural gas liquids. Ethane is one of the larger ones, but also propane, butane, and some other materials. They have to strip out the propane and the heavier olefins from the natural gas stream going because of pipeline specifications. But they can leave some of the ethane in. You can leave some of the ethane in. It makes the gas a little hotter, so you don't have to strip it all out. And that's what a lot of producers in this region have done. There hasn't been a home for the ethane as of yet. And then the takeaway capacity. So a lot of that ethane has been rejected. It is left in the gas stream. So this is just the production that has officially come out, has been stripped out. So I think there's a lot more ethane in this region. And this is EIA's projection. This is from their annual energy outlook looking forward to 2050, showing their projections for natural gas production in this region. They don't have a separate forecast for ethane, but because you have to strip the ethane out of the natural gas, I think this curve illustrates what ethane production may look like in the future. So it's a very, very huge and growing resource base in this area. So at the American Chemistry Council, we have been looking at these announced investments in petrochemical capacity since 2010. You heard the history from Dan that he gave earlier on how this has materialized. I was in a meeting in December of 2010. It was one of our member companies, and he said, "We are building a new ethane cracker on the Gulf Coast." And I thought I misheard him. I said, "What?" Because of all the ethane from shale gas. So I quickly started doing some research on it, and soon enough, I was hearing more and more of these announced investments. And so we started a database. We now have, I think it's over 300 individual projects that are linked to shale gas, valued at $202 billion. About 68% of that, can you go back, Abby? I'm sorry, thank you. About 68% of this investment is foreign direct investment, which is really exciting. As I mentioned, I've been with the industry on and off for a quarter century, and there are companies that are investing in our chemical industry that I'd never heard of before. It's really a phenomenal story. And a lot of that investment is either already complete or it's currently under construction. We still have about half of it that is in the pipeline. I mentioned earlier about the competitiveness and the price ratios, and after 2014, everybody said, nope, oil prices went down, you're not competitive anymore. You know, you're going to hear lots of cancellations of these projects. And so I show them this chart, which says we're still competitive. You know, some of that massive competitive advantage may have been eroded when the price of oil increased. I'm sorry, when the price of oil declined. But we're still very, very advantaged here. And companies are continuing to invest. So we were averaging about 9 announced investments in 2014. That dropped to maybe 2 in 2015-16, but we're still adding projects. The US is definitely a competitive destination for this type of investment. And I just wanted to mention, oh good, perfect, that about $19 billion of that $202 billion that we're tracking, about $19 billion of that is in the Appalachian region. So these are the pins of the various projects that we have in our database. And you can see they sort of track the Ohio River there. Okay. And there's a number of reasons why this is the case. I mean, I showed you that beautiful orange wedge of ethane coming out of Appalachia and the projections for more and more coming out. We've got proximity to the manufacturing markets in the Midwest, in Canada, and the East Coast. There's an opportunity to strengthen the US economy, providing employment in this region. And by investing in Appalachia, it avoids that ethane rejection I talked about. Instead of leaving that ethane in the gas stream, you pull it out, you make chemical and plastic products with it. So of that $202 billion of investment, about 2/3 of that is basic petrochemicals and plastic resins. We expect that much of this investment is export-oriented. We think about half or maybe a little bit more than half of the incremental new resin coming online will be exported, but that leaves about a little less than half of that to be used here in the United States. So we anticipate plastic products manufacturing to accelerate, and I think my colleague Pineda from the Plastics Association can talk more about this. We are tracking plastic production, plastic processing investments as well. Plastic processing is, of course, the largest consumer of the plastic resins. Here they go into all different kinds of things, all different kinds of manufacturing. There's every manufactured product, every building uses some form of plastic in some way or another. Okay. So this is a map of the existing plastic products manufacturing in the United States. This is the value of shipments, factory shipments with the value of output from these plants, just sort of the density of that. And I've overlaid that on the resource here in Appalachia, so the Marcellus and Utica shale, but also the Rogersville shale in Kentucky. We think that has some potential as well. And you can see how that overlays nicely with where that consumption base currently exists. So in addition to the chemical projects, we've also been tracking plastic processing projects. About a third of them are new greenfield plants, 70% of them are expansions of existing facilities. We've got about 700 projects in our database now, and these are the states that have 10 or more projects in our database. Pennsylvania's in here. I think it's ranked 12th. But you can see that with the exception of, I think, California, Texas, and Alabama, they're all relatively close to this Appalachian resource base. So you've got additional capacity coming online to use plastic resin in this region. So about a year and a half ago, we did some analysis, and I think others have also done some analysis. I know Denise Brindley's going to talk about a project that they've done here in Pennsylvania. But this was a project we did looking at the resource base that is expected to be here by 2025, about 350 to 400 barrels per day of ethane, and what that resource base could support in terms of a petrochemical and plastic products manufacturing industry. We assumed that there's storage and pipeline transportation for both feedstocks and products, so we've assumed that that's already in place. And we think about $36 billion of new chemical investment could be supported by that resource base and the build out going forward. I mentioned $19 billion has already been announced, but we think a total of about $36 billion could be supported here. And that includes 5 ethane crackers to produce ethylene from ethane, 2 propane dehydrogenation units. If you left some of the propane here, you could produce propylene, which goes into polypropylene and a bunch of other materials. So those downstream downstream products such as polyethylene, polypropylene, other derivatives, ethylene glycol, ethylene oxide, etc. So on the plastic side, you produce resin, but you can't just take that resin and make something out of it. You have to usually add other chemicals to impart different different specifications to it. So colors or something to make it more moldable. There's additives for if you've got a building product that's going to be outside, UV stabilizers, etc. So there's this whole other segment of the industry. It's kind of a small segment. People don't think of it very much, but it's a very important part of the manufacturing supply chain for plastics. So we've got that compounding piece. And then finally, our analysis assumed that about 10% of the incremental resin that is produced in Appalachia would stay in this region to support additional plastic products manufacturing. When I was driving in today, I saw 2 plastic products manufacturers here just in Titusville. I'm sure there's probably more, but those were the 2 that I found. And so that could be used in those production processes as well. So we looked to see what kind of economic activity could be supported by that. We've got a total of about almost $29 billion of output annually coming from this chemical and plastic products manufacturing industry here in Appalachia. That can support over 25,000 direct jobs in chemical manufacturing and that plastic products manufacturing. In addition, our analysis found 43,000 jobs in supply chain industries, and I believe about 1/5 of these were in manufacturing industries. The remaining 4/5 were in sort of extractive industries and the midstream processing, but also transportation and other services. And finally, one more. And then there were payroll-induced jobs. We found that this level of economic output coming out each year could support 32,000 payroll-induced jobs. Most folks think of these as retail jobs or restaurant jobs, but it's really much broader than that. Think teachers and pharmacists and physical therapists. So there's a lot of other economic activity happening on Main Street, and that's the spending that is supported by the payrolls that are earned in the supply chain. So at the end of the day, we had over 100,000 jobs supported by new economic activity from this scenario. But there are, of course, risks to any outlook like this. Unpredictable energy dynamics, of course, is paramount, but also workforce development issues. Are the folks around that can build these facilities and once they're built to operate them? There's capital cost escalation. We've seen some of this along the Gulf Coast, wage increases, but also the cost of some of the materials used to put these investments in place. Infrastructure gaps and capacity constraints. Is there enough rail transportation? Is there enough barge transportation, and the warehousing and the storage and all of those pieces of the logistics supply chain? Are those in place? I know there's some capacity constraints along the Gulf Coast. I don't know this region as well, but I'm sure that there's some capacity build-outs that need to be considered. This is one that keeps me awake at night lately, is market access and trade exposure. So many of these facilities are being built with exports in mind. And to the extent that some of the trade tensions could potentially put that at risk. And then finally, market imbalances and just in general, any barriers to energy or chemical production could be a risk. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my co-panelist, Abby.
So my name is Abby Foster. I'm president of the Pennsylvania Chemical Industry Council. ACC is our parent partner organization, and they're a wonderful resource. So if you haven't visited ACC's website, they have a number of different resources on the industry here in Appalachia, the opportunities, but also on the current industry that's here and has operations. So Pennsylvania's current chemical industry has more than 80,000 employees full-time, and it's a $24 billion industry. It's a big economic driver for the state. And as Martha discussed, this is really in no small part to the natural gas resources that we have, because not just for fuel for the manufacturing process, but as feedstock for the industry, and ethane is a big part of that. It's chiefly used for the production of ethylene, polyethylene, and then to plastic resins. And then, as Martha was talking about, the additives and the compounds and that whole process that the chemical industry does with the actual resins to make it more biodegradable, sustainable, resilient for uses and uses like construction. That's a whole other industry that's a part of the chemical industry in Pennsylvania. So there's been a number of studies that have discussed the opportunities that are coming because of this resource, and it's really expansive and revolutionary for the region. But as Martha noted on the last slide, workforce is a big part of that. And the chemical manufacturing and related industries are already experiencing kind of what some have called the gray tsunami, where this really educated and skilled workforce is retiring, and there's kind of a stigma associated with the jobs coming into this. And it's been kind of onerous on the industry to really work with educators and let them know where these gaps are going to be. And companies like Shell were really proactive with that. Beaver County Community College, Braskem out in the east has done that with Delaware County Community College. And they've developed curriculum for process operators, sometimes 2-year degrees for technical trades. But it's really been kind of those conversations starting and really important. I know there's educators here today, Clarion University, Penn State Behrend, but it really just starts with the conversation, and industry has been able to develop some of that hands-on training and make it really practical applications so that these kids, some of them coming straight out of high school, can just get an 8-week training program and start out as a process operator or tech with a $60,000 salary, and then they can grow from there. But that's really going to be key for not just industry continuing, but attracting those additional investments. So qualifications for industry positions depend largely on educational level, like I was saying. But with the 2-year associate's degree, you can be qualified for tech positions. Bachelor degree, if you want to take it a next step further, wide variety with bench scientists, technical support specialists, quality control. But then Penn State Behrend and Penn College in Pennsylvania is 2 of the only accredited plastics manufacturing programs in the U.S. So we have 2 of those programs here in Pennsylvania, and that's really what's going to set us apart for that kind of next level of the plastic manufacturing industry. So from a supply chain development perspective, there's really no crystal ball to predict exactly what the companies are going to be that are going to locate around this industry. But generally speaking, downstream from a cracker, companies that make up those markets are in the initial phases, of course, construction, engineering, trades, electrical, and that's where Shell really points to their success, is that they talked to the trades and unions really early on and were really transparent about what their needs were. And so they were able to really be able to plan for it and come through in a good way and be able to get things built on time because of those early conversations. So again, those conversations happening early, not just with educators, but with the trade and skilled unions. Others, chemical manufacturing, we talked about the ethylene and derivatives. And then the fabrication sites, so where the plastics and rubbers and materials are actually, blow molding or injection molding, and where they're actually manufactured. But the wholesalers, warehousing, distribution, sales, logistics for transportation, those are all downstream operations that are going to need to be continued to have workforce added to. Right now, some of our companies in the chemical manufacturing side can't even get logistics for truck drivers. They don't even have enough. And a lot of this is, a good problem to have because the natural gas industry increasing, a lot of the good jobs that are available, but it is a problem that needs to be addressed. When you consider the current industry in Pennsylvania, you can see it's really not a Western Pennsylvania industry. Locally, Conair manufactures plastic process equipment, Charter, Oil Creek Plastics, Dragon Plastics, all the local ones that you saw coming in. But there are companies statewide in the transport and storage of natural gas liquids, like Marcus Hook facilities, Boy Machines in York that develops plastic manufacturing equipment. And we're really looking forward to investments that are coming. But for example, an industry that's already has a supply chain built out in Pennsylvania is styrene, which is used to manufacture polystyrene. Nova Chemicals in Monaca employs 200 employees. They develop polystyrene. They receive their raw materials, styrene and pentane, by rail, truck, and barge, and they manufacture about 250 million pounds of plastic resins and expandable polystyrene annually. And then Dart Corporation on kind of the central part of the state in Leola and Lancaster, they employ about 2,000 employees, and they have statewide, they manufacture the end-use products, so the polystyrene cups or styrofoam containers or plastic food service. But there's huge amounts of distributors and warehouses and logistics associated with this industry statewide, which brings me to my next point. An additional challenge that's really facing the industry is the regulatory climate that we're putting in place. So there's a lot of educating that needs to take place around the industry, development of natural gas included, but it's also on the end-use products and waste management. And public opposition is definitely rooted, I think, in lack of education. And unfortunately, this has resulted in, legislation and a regulatory climate that's sometimes not exactly inviting for industry. Currently, there's legislation in Pennsylvania that would ban polystyrene use in food service industry. So all of your styrofoam cups or takeaway containers, and you've got manufacturing facilities down here in Monaca and then out in part of the state that employ over 2,500 people just in that direct business right there. So it's definitely something that we as kind of an industry and everyone related to it, upstream, midstream, and downstream, need to kind of be incumbent on us to tell our positive stories of how we're currently benefiting from the industry, but the opportunities to come. And I know there's local government, but people who also are employers in the area. But just really contacting your local paper, telling your story, contacting your legislator, making sure that that message gets out there. There's definitely thank you, Deb. There's definitely kind of a public opposition war on industry, as it were. And, we're not necessarily always the best at telling the good things that we're doing, but there are some really great sustainability initiatives that industry has undertaken, plastics to fuel initiatives. And ACC has, like I said, really great resources on their website. But from PCIC standpoint, we'll be trying to get that message out on the state level and really make sure that regulators know from a statewide perspective that this is an industry that can grow not just in Western Pennsylvania, but for the whole state. So we're looking forward to continuing to see that happen and being a part of it. That's it. Any questions?
All right, at this point in time, do we have any questions from the audience?
Yep.
All right. Representative.
Thank you. A lot of great people in the room, so I'm sure everybody knows what biodegradable means. I think it's one of the objections to the plastics industry from the environmentalists is the landfill issue. Can you develop a few more comments about this biodegradable option?
Sure. To be honest with you, I'm not an expert on biodegradable, so I'll say that. In terms of other opportunities for plastics, I think Abby talked about plastics to fuel, which is a really interesting technology. It takes non-recycled plastics and through a technology called reverse pyrolysis, it sort of backward engineers those hydrocarbons into fuel. I think it's like a diesel product. Actually, they've now configured it so you can get a number of different products out of it. You can get like a diesel. You can get something that's similar to naphtha that could be used for petrochemical feedstock to go through the cycle again. So it's a closing, trying to close that loop. so not biodegradable. And I'm sure that there are folks at ACC I could put you in touch with that are much more knowledgeable about this. I apologize that I'm just not the right person, but this plastics to fuel technology is really interesting. It's being deployed in several locations across the country. I'm not sure if there's any facilities yet here in Pennsylvania, but it's an exciting technology that does seek to sort of close that loop a little bit.
And then, so there are some, BASF has some really great technology where they add in, it's a part of the compound that is more biodegradable for plastics. Of course, those products aren't as durable, and they definitely don't hold up compared to your typical plastic products, but it is an option for the future. One other thing with the landfill conversation is that it's kind of a holistic issue that needs to be addressed from a waste management perspective, right? So even if we take out polystyrene, we'll be replacing it with paper products, which if you look at it from an overall perspective on what goes into making paper products from an entire environmental impact perspective, there's more greenhouse gas emissions and things that go into that from the manufacturing process than from developing polystyrene, which is a really light product. It's really durable. But even at Monaca, they've created a site where you can drop off so that they can recycle those products. DART Corporation has a pickup program that they have so that they just condense all the materials back into pellets, and then they're able to sell them to create other products. They actually sell them to Walmart and make frames out of them. Almost all the frames at Walmart are made from recycled polystyrene. So if in the absence of over-regulation on the industry, there will be innovations with it. They'll continue to look for ways so that there's not wasted materials, and they'll continue to strive for a closed-loop economy where they're extending the life of those compounds. They have these other programs where they'll actually take the molecule and break it back down so that they can use it again in manufacturing. But that's really something that ACC has started to focus on, and from PCIC's perspective in the state, we'll definitely be putting more of those resources out there to make sure that there is education around it, so that we don't continue to get kind of these knee-jerk bans and legislation in the absence of kind of our message out there on it.
Sir.
Your data mentions that significantly more than half of the investment in the region is foreign direct investment. Have you guys looked at where it's coming from and how and why?
Yeah, so you're talking about the 68%. That's of that 202 billion, so that's actually national. I don't have the breakouts for the investment in this region, but I know a large share of it's coming from Europe, in particular the Netherlands, the UK, Asia. I mean, it's really all over the world. I mean, there's Egyptian companies that are investing. Thai companies would be important to this region as well. But it's geographically kind of spread out. There's a big concentration from the Netherlands, and then there's a concentration in Asia, Taiwan, Thailand, China, Japan. I mean, it's global. I mean, you've got players from all over the world coming to the United States for this.
Anyone else? Okay, hearing none. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, up next we have Pineda. Perk is from the Plastics Industry Association, and he's going to talk to us about the chain reaction from petrochemicals to plastics manufacturing. So at this point in time, I'll turn it over to Perk. Well, we'll pull.
Just tell me when we'll post all of PowerPoints on the website.
Oh, okay. Lance just informed me, for all of you that are scribbling notes extremely quickly off of the PowerPoints, that they're actually going to post those onto the website, so you can give your hands a rest a little bit as we go through these next few presenters into the afternoon. So we'll make everything available to y'all after today. Kurt? There you go. This one's live if you don't want to use it.
Okay, all right. So I'll probably use both,
There you
if you
go.
don't mind. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I'm Perk Pineda. I'm the Chief Economist of Plastics, and I am honored to be here today, to be here in this place where oil started for the United States. So you guys have a long history in this industry, And so a lot of you could probably speak about this issue better than I can. I have a background in different industries, from dairy, from finance, and at some point I was an economics professor at the City University of New York. I taught economics of regulation and the law, which I thought was interesting. But one story that I'd like to start my presentation today, so that we'll put everything in perspective, is when I was doing my dissertation, my advisor told me, if this is the 15th or the 20th revision of your dissertation, I would really have to stop you. This is the time when your relationship between your advisors is supposed to change. We're now on some sort of an equal playing field. And bear in mind, he told me, that there are only two types of economic forecasts. They're either wrong or they're not. And so with that, I could actually stop my presentation right now and just go home, right? But what I'm going to share with you today is some of my insights on the plastics industry. And when Lance and I were talking about the topic, and I said, well, this is probably a good topic. It's called chain reaction from petrochemicals to plastics manufacturing. And there is no secret that we're all endowed with all these resources. We have amazing human capital in the United States. This is skills and knowledge embodied in labor. And we could turn all these things into a product that we want. And petrochemicals feeds into a lot of the manufacturing sectors of the economy. But probably one of your questions this morning is, what does the future look like for the plastics industry? And if I could point you to a Yogi Berra quote, wherein he said, in some of his funny quotes, the future ain't what it used to be. What does that mean? So if you ask me, the future of the plastics industry is not consistent with Yogi Berra's quote. I personally think that we would continue on a moderate to strong growth throughout this year and the next year and possibly in 2020. We don't see any signs at the moment in our industry that plastics production, more so consumer demand for products, and you know that plastics is ubiquitous, is going to slow down in the next few years to come. And in fact, if the Congressional Budget Office is correct, that the United States economy will go in an excess demand, meaning demand will be exceeding more than our potential capacity to produce goods and services, then demand for all goods and services in the United States will also continue to increase, and that would include the plastics industry. So the bottom line is, we're not in the 9th inning in the plastics industry, as far as I'm concerned, and I think that includes the oil and gas sector as well. Things are looking good for the U.S. economy and the plastics industry at the moment. This chart is probably something that a lot of you can explain better than I can. For those of you who are scientists and engineers, or those who are on the ground, you could probably explain the process better. But if you look at the last line in this chart, it tells you the petrochemicals and where it could possibly go into in a lot of industries, in a lot of the manufacturing sector. And in fact, in the plastics industry, we're proud to say that plastics actually improves lives, and in a lot of cases, plastics actually saves lives. You cannot always have liquid absorbent carpets, for example, in medical facilities, because if you drop an important chemical, you need to have an opportunity to retrieve it, be it blood, be it expensive medication. You could possibly do that in cases of emergency if the carpet is actually polypropylene made of plastic, because it doesn't absorb it. And so there are a lot of ways that the plastics industry has helped mankind in the progress in medical devices, medical supplies, dental supplies, et cetera, and that all can be traced into the petrochemical industry and traced back further into natural gas. I prepared I was about to show you a clip but I cannot bring it on because of internet and Wi-Fi connection issues. But if you could take down this website, it's called thisisplastics.com. Thisisplastics.com is the effort of the Plastics Industry Association to provide educational tools to everyone. It is something that you could use for your kids in their school projects, for your companies, and it has all these little video clips of how the plastics industry has actually saved lives. From sustainability, plastics is now the #1 choice of prosthesis, for example, for prosthesis. You can't have medical devices with a lot of metal in it because it wouldn't take the picture of your internal organs if there's metal. And so there's a lot of information in our website called thisisplastics.com. Okay, I'm back. See, it says thank you. Let's try again. There you go. Now, as far as the number of jobs in the plastics industry, we are in the middle of calculating the economic impact of plastics using 2017 data. So the data that I'm showing to you right now is 2016. That in 2016, there were about 965,000 jobs in the plastics industry. And if you add the supply chain to it, the suppliers outside of the plastics industry, that is, we're talking about 1.76 million jobs. And that's about 16,080 manufacturing establishments throughout the United States. California, obviously, because it's a big state, has the most employees in the plastics industry. But if you look at the chart to your right, Pennsylvania is actually the 7th. About 48,000 workers in the plastics industry in Pennsylvania. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if next year the manufacturing establishments would probably a little slightly lower, or it could be higher. And if it's lower, the only explanation that I can come up with is because of mergers and acquisitions. The economy is booming. There are a lot of buying opportunities of bigger firms trying to gobble up smaller firms. So there's some action in mergers and acquisitions in the plastics industry, so that number would probably slightly lower, but that doesn't mean that the plastics industry is actually in a downward trend. If we look at employment in the Appalachia region, you could see that Pennsylvania actually ranks the 2nd. And if you look at the last 2 columns there on the right that talks about payroll in millions of dollars, you can see that 2.4 billion in the plastics industry and 76.9 billion if you include the dependent industry. So I've said many times this morning since I started opening my mouth at 10:05 how important the petrochemical industry is. But do you guys have any idea of which sector of the economy is highly restrictive or has the most restrictions? Any guesses? What is the most restricted industry or sector in the U.S. economy? If you need help, let's play some music that would probably help us all. Any guess? It has the most number of restrictions. It starts with letter M. Well, you'll be surprised that the industry that actually has the most number of restrictions is actually manufacturing. And there's a couple of economics professor at the George Mason University who probably has nothing else better to do. Actually, the opposite of that. They have better things to do, and this is one of the things that they do very well, is they looked at the Code of Federal Regulations, or the CFR, and found out that manufacturing actually has the most restrictions by using a proxy of counting all the words that has must or should. So manufacturing must, manufacturing should, manufacturing this and that and this and that. But if you look at finance and insurance, which really was the cause of the financial crisis, if you ask me, in 2008, 2009, because of over-borrowing and over-lending, it's not as heavily restricted as manufacturing. If you go down further the list, you see information. And you see the big players in information technology just in Congress last week. They only have 69.5 thousand must and shall in the Code of Federal Regulations, while manufacturing is 215,000. And it is a shame, because if you ask me, common sense regulation is really what every industry needs. And how economists view regulations as an impediment to success is that regulations take away resources which could otherwise go into productive areas. So you now have to do all this. Only 15% and under actually expect to see a decline in the end markets of the plastics. The medical devices sector is expected to grow in the same path as the consumer products and appliances sector. So majority of our members see continued growth in the medical devices and supplies. If you look at their trade outlook, majority of them see no change in trade in this year, in the next 12 months rather, but they see a lot of growth coming from the United States. The percentage of no change in trade outlook is greater than the percentage expecting a decline, and in fact only 10% of them actually expect a decline in US trade in the next 12 months. I couldn't stress enough the value of medical devices and the plastics industry, because according to the National Institute of Aging, one of the biggest or the most important achievement in the 20th century is actually the extension or the increase of the average life expectancy. And that is only possible because we found better ways of managing infectious diseases. And that's where single-use plastics actually come in handy. And that's where medical devices also come in handy, advances in technology, which would otherwise not be possible if plastic parts are not available. And in fact, if you look at demographic forecast, the number of 85-year-olds and over the population is expected to increase 351% between 2010 and 2050. So there would always be demand for medical devices and supplies and healthcare services for that matter. So the shipments of plastics and rubber, in terms of the value of their shipments, if we look at that until June 2020, I have prepared some sort of 3 scenarios. The red line there in the chart to your left shows you what's going to happen if business as usual continues. And if it's business as usual, we would probably end meaning the first half of 2020 with an increase in the shipments of plastic and rubber products by 2.4%. And to me, that's rather reasonable, because plastics industry is a mature industry, and so therefore it would track the growth of GDP. And if the economy is actually going to overheat, meaning it would be increasing more than its capacity to increase, and we would really have dramatic growth, then we could probably see a 13% increase by June of 2020. Otherwise, if the economy slows down, you have slower GDP, If we go into another recession, then probably we'll see a decline of 80% by June of 2020. If you look at the relationship between plastics and retail sales and food services sales, you can see that the relationship is almost 1-to-1. There is a 0.94 correlation between retail and food services and plastic shipments, and that long, stable relationship is expected to continue, particularly that the forecast of retail sales for this year is supposed to be 3.8 to 4.4% higher than last year. And considering that plastics goes into a lot of the manufacturing industry, if we look at industrial production, and if you take a simple, nerdy approach of smoothing it, and you look at the cycle of it to the right, you can see that we're actually in the upward cycle of industrial production. And so we don't really see any slowdown in the near future. And in fact, if we point to the Institute of Supply Managers Manufacturing Index, it was up 61.3 in August, and that was the highest since May of 2004. And that's up from 58.1 in May. So things continue to look good for the economy. Of course, there would always be challenges along the way, but at the moment, things are good. And in fact, even in the plastics, materials, and resin, you could also see that the trend is also upwards. Even in the production of plastic products, the trend is also upwards. So let me go to my annual forecast in the 4 sectors that I talked about. In the materials and resin part, production, we would probably see a 3.2% increase this year, and then slowing down a bit to 2.9 next year. If we looked at the plastics production, these are volumes, we are expecting a 2.9% increase. This is not the shipment, but this is the total production, 2.9%. And if you look at 2019, next year, we would probably end up with an increase of 2.7%. If we go into the plastics machinery and equipment, we're expecting a robust increase this year of 6.5%, primarily because of the business cycle, and a lot of these equipments probably need replacement. There's innovation in the industry, so they need new machineries. And so the production probably of plastics machinery would be up 6.5%, and then a little bit moderate next year of 2.8%. And finally, plastics molds. These are the molds, industrial molds, so you could push the resin and heat them up and make some plastic products. We are expecting a 2.1% increase this year, and then 3.4% next year. Trade. Your industry, without you knowing it or not aware of it, is a global industry. You are probably producing locally, but the world is your market. It's the same thing with the plastics industry. The world is our market, and we depend so much on export. If you look at this chart or the slide, you can compare the exports and the imports. We had a trade surplus of 2.7 billion last year. It was a little bit down from 4.9 billion in 2016, and the reason for that is when the economy picks up steam, personal consumption expenditure increases, and that includes consumption of imported materials, imported products. The United States is an open and a free trader, and so we also have an increase in imports. As you can see, majority of our exports is actually resin, as far as the plastics industry is concerned. But we have a trade deficit in plastic products. So in bullet form, the second bullet reads our exports rose 5.2%, but our imports rose faster at 9.3%, basically because consumption is good and has been increasing in the United States, and that included consumption of imported products. The value of estimated shipments domestic grew 5.2% in 2017 to 306.2 billion. Who do you think are our biggest markets, the plastics industry? It's Canada and Mexico. Do we need NAFTA? Absolutely. Mexico and Canada remain the U.S. plastics industry's largest export market, 15.7 billion to Mexico and 12.5 billion to Canada. We have our largest trade surplus with Mexico. That's in 2017, 10.6 billion, as far as the plastics industry is concerned. China is our largest market, also third largest, but unfortunately we have an 11.5 billion deficit with China. In fact, this chart tells you we're barely making even with our trade with Canada. Our imports and exports in plastics with Canada are about the same. 12.5 billion of exports, 12.4 billion of imports. Compare that to Mexico, the red lines, the difference is day and night. And that's why the president wanted to speak with Mexico first and get that agreement going. This is how I see it as the plastics industry chief economist. And then Canada later, because we're just breaking even with Canada. It's important to secure the agreement with Mexico. Now, we are faced with issues that are somewhat leading to some uncertainty in the industry, particularly all these tariffs that are imposed on Chinese-made goods. And we have tried higher tariffs in the past, but it didn't really work and it had limited results. The Obama tariffs in 2009, for example, it led to loss of jobs of 2,500 because of higher prices of tires. It was inflationary. The Bush steel tariffs in 2002. It also increased prices, and if you calculate the welfare lost according to other economists, we're talking about a welfare loss of $41.6 million. And this is once again in form of higher prices. Are we wrong to impose higher tariffs on China? My personal opinion is if we want to level the playing field, we could probably increase it at the same rate as they're charging us. China is imposing an average tariff of 10.2% in the plastics industry. The US is imposing 2.5%. Why don't we raise it to 10.2%? Then they will see that we're actually serious and we will start talking, because that's what's missing at the moment. In the end, my personal opinion is this. Global trading has actually been a boon to Chinese economy. The number of people living under $1.90 a day in China has decreased from 766.8 million to 18.5 million. How? Because they have been exporting their products to the rest of the world. They need global trade more than the United States from this perspective. And if you look at how they're increased in goods and services export, the chart to your right, you can see a dramatic increase beginning in the late 1990s. And that's also the time that we saw manufacturing employment decline in the United States. When do you think is going to be the next recession? I've been asked this question a lot, and the answer is I don't know to say exactly when. Like the talking heads you see in television is rather naive or pretentious. And so I would point to a model from the National Bureau of Economic Research, actually the arbiters or the gatekeepers whether we have inflation or not. And they look at 4 coincident indicators, or these are data sets that actually move with the economy. And these are industrial production, real personal income, meaning personal income adjusted to inflation. The number of non-farm payrolls, the value rather of non-farm payrolls, whether it's going up or going down in retail sales. And if you take the cycle of this data and you plot it against the mean, so that's what I have there. The 0 is actually the mean and standard deviation units on the left. As you can see that before a recession, the gray bars there, you could actually see all those 4, some sort of a concerted way, starting to come down. At the moment, the latest data that I looked at, we're not there at all. It looks like we are somewhere in the late 1990s, but things are moving in the opposite direction, which is up. So then again, it points back to my comment earlier that if the Congressional Budget Office is correct, then the U.S. economy is actually going to be overheating for some time, and we will have some serious inflation problems if that's the case. So I'm not worried about inflation for the rest of the year. And of course, as I said earlier, lucky or wrong, then you'll probably email me with your hate mail, and we'll take it. But that's all I have for you today. And as a summing up, there is no secret that the petrochemical industry is really critical to the competitiveness of U.S. plastics industry. I mean, you can't argue with that. You can take that anywhere. But we have negative effects of labor shortages in manufacturing, and that's actually going to be more pronounced next year, if you ask me. Manufacturing in the industry has morphed from a simple conveyor belt, lift, and do X, Y, and Z. Now it's a little bit more sophisticated, that you need people who are technically skilled to troubleshoot a machine. Manufacturing now is systems and machines talking to each other. It now requires a lot of engineering, math, and sciences in the production floor. So the young kids who think that manufacturing is no longer sexy or has never been sexy, they're actually misinformed. There's a lot of creativity that is required in manufacturing in the future as society moves more and more into some customized product. It had started in the tennis shoes 5 years ago. You can customize your own Nike, you can customize your own this and that. And we could see that happening also in the plastics industry in the future. Unless we have further deterioration in trade relations with our partners, I still continue to expect, I expect the plastics industry will continue to grow. And once again, we need common sense regulation for all industries. And in fact, so that this presentation will not end in a boring note, let's do a little light bulb joke. How many conservative economists does it take to screw a light bulb? And the answer is none. If the government would leave it alone, it would screw itself. U.S. economic fundamentals are currently sound, and thank you so much for your time.
Let's see if we have any questions. Yes. Do we have any questions at this point in time? Yes, sir.
In your economic forecast, what do you think the red line spending and the constant revenue raising of the governments is going to have an effect on the economy?
If it goes to be at the very excessive rate of borrowing,
We've already made it there.
I'm sorry?
We've already made that.
Yes. And the economy begins to slow down, then we're really shooting ourselves in the foot. So I think the next issue that the government really needs to focus on is how to ensure that we have policies to keep productivity in our economy high enough so that all of this government projects and programs would no longer be necessary because people have what they need. For example, we have a very strong labor market at the moment, and so you would think that welfare payments, for example, would be much, much lower, or some programs would be then changed or be replaced or improved, and the share of the state or the public side of funding of those would actually be much, much limited than they used to. Of course, these are highly politically sensitive views, but an economy cannot continue borrowing and borrowing and borrowing. There has to be some sort of a revenue coming in, because it's only through savings, both from the private sector and the government sector, that we could actually ensure a better economic performance moving forward. China, for example, has 250% debt to GDP ratio at the moment. And with a slowdown of the Chinese economy that's expected to start happening this year and the next. slow down, meaning they would no longer be experiencing a double-digit growth that like they used to 5-6 years ago, which was really making the United States sick. How can they possibly have a 10% GDP growth and us 2%? We're so envious. If they give us a 6% growth, we'll take it, but they're not happy about that. Now they're realizing, as they did 2 years ago, that when they stimulated their economy, that they actually need to deploy more cash or more money or more funding, more government debt, 3 times as much as they used to. And that is just not sustainable at all. And so sound fiscal policy is important. We can't continue borrowing, as I said. And in fact, we've seen that in the financial crisis, not to repeat myself, there was just over-borrowing and over-lending in the economy, and that's what caused the problem.
It was refreshing to hear you talk about an apples-to-apples comparison on tariffs, because all the drama around the trade war stuff, there really isn't a whole lot of data. So I'm glad I came to Titusville to hear a side-by-side comparison on at least one kind of a category. But back to the deficit spending and the debt. So another thing that you don't hear about is how are government revenues running with the economy doing better versus the projections and all of the deficit spending that came with the tax cuts?
If you look at the tax revenue report of the U.S. Treasury Department, which comes out every quarter, you could actually see that in the first quarter, and that is when you would factor in, okay, there's already a tax cut, corporate taxes are lower, income taxes are lower. They've actually seen the tax collection was actually higher. Of course, that was just one quarter. And so I haven't looked at the data in the second quarter and see what that rate of collection actually of government revenue has been. One of the sticking points is you can't really make it too low because tax-wise, because then government revenue would actually be negative. You can't also make it too high because then people would choose not to work. But it has always been a question and a challenge amongst economists. What is really that optimal tax rate? And once again, the answer is nobody really knows. What is that optimal tax rate really? And nobody really knows. It becomes a dancing landscape in a sense that the projects that need to be funded by the government would continue to evolve. For example, there's a very good question earlier this morning about biodegradable. We have Bioplastics Council in the plastics industry, and we just put out a product market watch on bioplastics. And you can look it up in our website. One of the challenges in the United States at the moment is related to infrastructure, is we don't have enough recycling facilities. And so one way of really solving the land filling issue is if we set aside money and infrastructure into building recycling facilities. And this is not the government picking winners and losers and funding who they think are good for them. But this boils down into the basic argument in economics that if there's an externality or the third-party effects, for simple terms, if it's a positive externality, then what should the government do? They should subsidize those. And we're doing that, for example, with public education, public schools. We're subsidizing it. If it's a negative externality, then one of the approaches the government can do is to tax it. We have been doing that also for environmental and air pollution, et cetera, et cetera. But when you talk about recycling facility, these are infrastructure, there could be infrastructure spending that actually falls in the category that's generating external, positive externalities. And it needs to be subsidized in some form, not really raising new taxes for it, but really seriously looking at where should this infrastructure funds should go to. We haven't even talked about what should be the highways of the future when electric vehicles and and automated trucks will be here. We haven't even talked about that. So that's also part of the infrastructure project. So.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, at this point in time, we're going to take about a 15-minute break. So feel free to wander around and see the exhibitors and talk amongst yourselves. Thank you.
New demand for natural gas, Pennsylvania, home-based natural gas, but also, again, improving our environmental impact. Installing combined heat and power. There are a number of projects that we're working on as a company to have CHP programs to generate electricity for hospitals, universities, again, building demand for natural gas here at home. And finally, we're piloting fuel cells, which are home-based applications that we're going to be putting out in the fall through a partnership back in Pittsburgh, where a home can be powered by electricity generated by natural gas with very little or no emissions. So you can have homes that are in effect disconnected from the grid, powered by a combination of solar and natural gas. So that whole first strategy of maximizing our in-state demand for power and heating is already hard at work. There are a lot of folks in the room that are working on that. I know we as a company are as well. Obviously, the second part, which is the biggest opportunity, building downstream commercial applications in 3 clusters: petro, advanced manufacturing, and advanced materials. And then finally, maximizing gas exports. Obviously, the pricing issues have tampered that, but as we expand pipeline in other areas of the state to make sure that Pennsylvania is winning on the export game is something that is part of the 3 strategies. So again, fairly common sense, but to see it up there and you know, through a McKinsey lens, to really maximize our opportunities and our objectives, this is really the goal for the roadmap for maximizing the impact on Pennsylvania. So the next slide kind of shows the employment situation. So again, through it's all well known that we've had a manufacturing decline of about 35% over the last 15 years. Oil and gas has chipped into that, but hasn't recovered it fully. And so this slide just kind of shows our share by industry, which shows that decline. You know, right now we're looking at the largest decline, but again, we haven't fully recovered the offset by oil and gas, and that's really our challenge. But for oil and gas, obviously, we'd be in a much worse position. And then that's really the story of the last 10 years of the economic recovery in this region has been funded by energy. So what is the potential impact that we're facing? It's huge. So I like to say, you know, I was part of the effort of and I have the scars to prove it, of trying to woo Amazon to come to the region. I quarterbacked that for the mayor. When we did that, we set aside a lot of the things we were doing in city government. We built a team. That was really a Hunger Games competition against a number of other cities across the country. But really, we were trying to land was about 50,000 jobs, right? Huge, right? But what are we talking about here? Over 100,000 jobs. So here, everybody got together. The media was all over it. We moved heaven and earth, the foundations, universities. We worked together with Harrisburg to put together a package. Obviously, Pittsburgh and Philadelphia are still in the running for a company. But this is an opportunity that is much, much bigger and has the ability to create even a bigger impact for regular day Pennsylvanians. What we're talking about in 3 metrics on GDP, if we fully realize those 3 levels of opportunities, again, as we identified in phase 1, we're talking about a 10% increase to state GDP, over 100,000 new jobs, and about a 95% increase in demand for local gas. So that's the charge. And really, it's there for us to grab at, the brass ring. And this chart is fairly, it lays out, that middle bar lays out the economic impact for each of the 3 strategies that we've identified in phase 1. And if we really got together and did the work. A little bit, though, about the role of government. Obviously, we've talked a lot about government regulation today, but government's a market participant. And when you think about that, I know that when we think about it in Allegheny County and in Pittsburgh, due to the disinvestment and the diaspora of folks that had to leave here in the 80s, we have a lot of land, right? Through tax situations, we have the ability to create incentives, a lot of investments in infrastructure. So, you know, the role that we're trying to play, at least at the Redevelopment Authority back home, is to make sure that we're participating in what are the top 10 sites for the next petrochemical plant here in Western Pennsylvania. If we all got together and worked together, not as a county, but you know, as an entire region, to really take full advantage of this opportunity. The next idea here, just to drill down upon the 3 downstream sectors, petrochemicals, advanced manufacturing, and advanced materials. This is just some more details of the existing assets that we have in play in Pennsylvania and some of the stretch opportunities for high value growth that we identified as part of the study. Jerry talked a little bit about what we've been doing. This is a steering committee. We have a delivery office. We actually have a virtual meeting every Tuesday. Actually, this morning, 8 o'clock, I missed it. I had another thing going on with work. But we are working hard every day to make sure, again, that my boss's charge, Morgan O'Brien, that this not just be a study that sits on a shelf and collects dust, that we're creating a blueprint to actually deliver. We've organized 5 teams, as Jerry mentioned. We've just completed the phase 2 session. I know a number of folks here in the room. We're down at our offices in Pittsburgh, where we had some really good ideas come out of this. So how do we take all of these opportunities, which now we've defined through the first study? We've put down what the potential economic impact in terms of GDP, jobs, increase in demand for gas, and identify our next steps. And that's where Jerry's going to take back over. So the outcome of that in phase 2 was a number of very specific recommendations that we all can aspire as a blueprint for taking full advantage of this opportunity. Again, not just to make sure that we're sort of companies are taking advantage of this, but we're making sure we're providing equity to make sure that all Pennsylvanians have the ability to participate in this new economy. Thank you.
So just a couple of quick notes on Kevin's comments and some of the other ones this morning. You know, if you go to the site and you look at the full report and you look at that chart, advanced manufacturing and advanced materials are on there. And you know, I've had people come to me, and I know the steering committee has heard other questions from people saying, well, you know, what's robotics really got to do with this resource? And I think, you know, energy, power, and heat-intensive businesses, you know, it's an overwhelming part of the cost of doing business. If you're going to run a plant that's going to manufacture things, but it's using robots instead of people, you know, that's an added demand on the energy side of things. And we can, as Kevin was saying, with some of the innovative natural gas to power technologies, make that power from natural gas. So that's one piece of it. And the larger part of that discussion that I can just give you a little bit of insight on as far as the steering committee's engagement with McKinsey was, and I've heard this comment before on a number of parts of the potential for this, is that this ain't Texas, this is Pennsylvania. And we do have all of the assets in Pennsylvania, the kinds of innovations in automation and software and artificial intelligence, the things that universities, not just in Western Pennsylvania, but all over Pennsylvania are doing with advanced manufacturing and data analytics. You know, we asked McKinsey specifically not to just tell the region how it can replicate the Gulf Coast, but in a different geography, but bend the resource to how is this energy resource going to support all of the other things that are going on here, so that we're not in a conversation about, well, you know, are we going to do self-driving cars and education and medicine, or are we going to do energy? We should be doing all of it. And they are very much related. So the last note is, you know, the one chart that Kevin showed that has a huge increase in export, and there's always a lot of discussion about, well, you know, we don't want to just have all of this gas and all of this ethane leaving the state. We need to add value to it here. And people will question, well, I mean, you're talking about significant increases in export. You know, that kind of violates the idea of adding value to it here. Those kinds of increases in export are concurrent with the kinds of impact on GDP and jobs and employment growth. So the fact of the matter is the gas resource is so big that you can do both. And, you know, those are just a couple of editorial comments on that. So Kevin mentioned that, and I talked a little bit about the 3 phases. So we have engaged business people from across the state. We are in the process of going through all of that information, and we had a team leader for each one of the 5 teams against the 5 strategies that ran those groups, and Rob Wunderling is sifting and sorting things in the same way on that side of the state. So we're in the process of getting through all of that, but what I thought we could do this morning is just give you a little bit of a glimpse of what directionally the kind of thinking that came out of it. Tax reform is something that has been talked about, continues to be talked about, whether it's taxes on corporations or other parts of the tax code, but it was clear, and there are some specific suggestions that are going to be in the report, that tax reform in Pennsylvania is a big part of the direction that's going to support really fully realizing the opportunity here. The regulatory environment, it gets talked about all the time. I know a lot of us have been to these kinds of meetings before, and how you can not only be efficient about working with business to get through that process, but also be competitive with other parts of the country that want the investment, and in fact around the world that want the investment. I mean, we have to compete on that, was some of the feeling that came through there. Infrastructure, supporting the expansion. There are some existing programs. I think the voice of the people who were involved in phase 2 was that more needs to be done on that. Some of the things that are happening can be built on, and you'll see some of that in there. Some kind of, and I'm not exactly sure, but I understand maybe there was a functional process like this at the state level in Pennsylvania before, but some kind of a place where there could be an individual or a close set of individuals who are really accountable and responsible for shepherding this energy sector and helping make it happen. I mean, it's a historic opportunity. It seems like it would deserve something like that. And then really back to the innovation, the automation, and the computerization. There's some people think it's a little bit buzzwordy to talk about Industry 4.0, but there is a coming revolution in manufacturing, and that you can see Pennsylvania today where we're doing it, it's there, everybody kind of knows about it, but to be able to put a flag in the ground and say, this is the place where we have the energy and we have the people and we have the assets and the resources that we're going to lead on a global scale to do this, it's available to us, and we have the universities and the people in government and in business who could come together and make a big deal out of that. And so that's another thing that started to emerge in the discussion. There was also a lot of talk about our performance relative to national benchmarks and competitive regional benchmarks on GDP growth and population. We're not performing as well as we could be, especially when we have a resource like this. And so the feeling of the participants was that against the backdrop of faster growth on population and GDP in other places, we have a resource like this that we could lever to do that. So a few of the points that emerged, awareness and education, a lot of the things that were touched on related to it, whether it's the opposition to development of the resource or opposition to plastics or any number of issues that can arise and get in the way of having a license to operate, the permission to operate in the communities where you do. There's just a very strong sense in this group and in the deliberations that we need to do a much better job of having a big and balanced conversation about what's real and what the industry is actually doing to protect public health and the environment, in addition to providing economic benefits. And I know working in and around the industry for a long time that, the conflict is one thing, but to me, I think we've shown over and over again that basically it's juxtaposing economic and environmental interests and creating a choice that, well, we can either have one or we can have the other one. And I think the industry partnering with each other and with government has shown time and time again that innovation and technology can bring those economic and environmental interests together. It would be great if we were all pulling in that direction to solve the problems rather than try to kill the industry, essentially. So the tax policy part of it I mentioned, and then workforce development. I think along the way there's a sense that there are so many programs and so many people and so many organizations working on this that, did it really need to be called out? But I think as people thought about it and as the teams worked through the information, they asserted that they really wanted to have that included and spotlighted in the report. So that's part of it as well. So there are some summary considerations, and I guess I'll just go through a few of them quickly. One is, we have the vast resource, and energy is such, even just the power needs, but if you go on to the feedstock needs and the heating needs, it's such a big part of what any business needs to pay for in order to operate. It really is a major driver of economic activity, and we've got the resource, so we should be exploiting that. A few other themes that run through it, there is a great opportunity. There are a lot of individual efforts to do the work and get the word out and show up and be part of the conversation. I think the sense of the group was that there needs to be some kind of a meta program that really brings a lot of that together, makes it available and drives it digitally, and takes the whole engagement and awareness and education part of the equation to a whole new level. And I think, one of the things that I heard from people who participated in this was, we have the resource, we're performing okay, but we really do have a tremendous amount of upside, and the opportunity for everybody to work together and really achieve that is right in front of us. So I think one of the biggest things that I've heard in reaction to the work through the whole process is that it's exciting to hear about something that's this tangible and that's here, that represents a pretty exciting growth opportunity and a growth agenda. And so, we're looking forward to continuing the process, publishing the report, and then, as I said before, in phase 3, plugging into the existing people and resources and infrastructure that's out there to help make the potential a reality. So that's where we stand on Forge the Future right now, and if anybody has any questions, Kevin and I can help out.
So Jared, just a quick question. Has Northwest PA been included as part of the Forge the Future study report? Northwest PA?
Yes, there were...
Do you want to repeat the question? You need to repeat the questions out.
Yeah, the question was, has Northwest PA been engaged in this process? And I know that whether it was companies in the downstream plastics, Penn State Barron, we have them engaged in it as well. So yes, the voices of people in this region in business and academia are part of it. Yeah. Other questions? Yes.
Was this initiative originally started at Pittsburgh or Philly? And then I find it quite interesting, the two large cities across the state working together. Can you elaborate on how that came about?
Well, I think probably what's at the foundation of your question was why it was purposeful. As I mentioned, the conversation started between Morgan and Nigel at Chevron and then continued with Morgan and Stacy. But I think if you know Morgan and Stacy, they're pretty big thinkers, and they were purposeful about saying, hey, this isn't going to be just about Western Pennsylvania. This is going to be about Pennsylvania. In fact, it really is about way more than Pennsylvania. It's about the region, other states, West Virginia and Ohio, and even Kentucky, was mentioned here earlier today. So they wanted to take a holistic view of it, but I think just from a practical view, having McKinsey dig into all three of those states and everything that's going on, they limited it to Pennsylvania, and they put the funding up. So it started with Chevron and Peoples, and they funded it. There's additional funding that's in it now, but they did that purposefully. And Dennis Jablonski and Rob Wunderling have worked together for years across the state and in Harrisburg, so it was really kind of a natural thing. Yes?
Yes. Peoples as the tariff holder in this, along the coastline of Lake Erie, do you see any possibilities of LNG terminals utilizing the St. Lawrence Seaway and pushing into Europe or the upper Midwest?
Do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, not within my workflow right now. I mean, I know that a lot of the focus we have on expansion doesn't include LNG, as but it'd be something I'd be willing to talk about offline if there are opportunities.
And there are, if you go to the report at paforgethefuture.com, there is a section on export capacity, and Lake Erie was definitely talked about in the mix. I think what's happening on the east side of the state, though, has probably become more of a priority that way. And I don't recall exactly what the facts were around consideration of Lake Erie as an export point, but I think there's some information in the report that can illuminate that for you.
Good question.
Other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Hold on.
What I'm going to ask you to do is, lunch will be served in the fairway room. Take a seat, and then they will tell which table to go up to the buffet, because they're just finishing getting set up. So if you'll go ahead and go on out into the fairway room, and we'll have a lunch. We are so grateful to have the next group of people speaking. A lot of times we are unaware of things that are going on. They're going to be talking about this initiative, the coalition that is the 3 states working together, the Tri-State Coalition. And you have all the information on your agenda. And I'm just going to turn it over to Denise, because are you going to be speaking first?
I am. Mm-hmm.
This is on.
Okay.
No, it's not, because it's connected to the computer now, so you'll have to use that. Okay.
All right, I'm just going to slide over here so you can see me. First of all, I would just want to say thank you to Lance and Deb, and just spend a few minutes explaining something that's important for the folks in the room to hear. Last year, Lance and Deb had invited DCD up here to speak, and we had a contingent of folks here, and we reflected on the results of our IHS report that had been recently published, and we talked about some of those and how it might impact the long-term success of Pennsylvania. And we left the impression that we should all be imperiled to do something. And that we needed a sense of urgency about our actions. And there's no one who has taken that more to heart than Lance and Deb. In the sense that they have taken this charge very seriously and have really advanced the ball in this region and helping to educate and advocate for the long-term future of Pennsylvania. So I just wanted to thank both of them for having a vision and for pushing along an agenda that is important to all of us. I'm also going to spend just a few minutes talking to you about a session that
DCED participated in Southwest PA yesterday, and I think it's a good reflection point at this point in the conference and the proceedings to talk about where we are. I should mention too that the session that we sat in was with the economic development and the workforce delivery service providers in Southwest. So many of you serve in those roles. So I think it's important for you to hear a little bit about our discussion. In that after a 3-hour session, we stepped back and said, we are advancing on the economic development piece, we're advancing on the workforce piece, but we don't yet know what we're advancing towards. Because what's really valuable is pushing to use the feedstock that's here. So I just want to take this moment at the beginning, and I think it's really all about what the Tri-State Shale Coalition has been trying to do all along, which is to raise the value proposition for what is underneath our feet. And from that, additional opportunities flow. We've heard a lot this morning about the downstream industry, including plastics, and I've heard petchem thrown in there. It originates with the natural gas liquids and the natural gas that is here. And some of the slides that I show you will explain why that's so important. I also know that there's a lot of interest in what Shell will be to the region, to the state. If you had a chance to see what we saw in Orlando, Florida this year in May, which was their brand launch at a global conference in Orlando, their tagline was "Start Believing." So just take a few minutes and reflect on what that means. This is the first real world-class ethane cracker that will produce polymers in the northeast part of the United States, ever. So it is about the feedstock, and we have to step back and make sure that we are equally focused on that, and it will help to align what those longer-term plastics manufacturing opportunities might be. All right. So I'm here to kick off a presentation of the Tri-State Shale Coalition. And this is us, right here. 3 people in the flesh that represent the Tri-State Shale Coalition. How many of you have heard of the Tri-State Shale Coalition? Okay, see, we're doing better. Like, we might be up to 60% now. So the first conference we went to, we asked this question, there was roughly 25% of people who raised their hands. So we are trying to get this awareness out there. What is the Tri-State Shale Coalition? And why does it matter? If you go back to the Shell example, Shell looked at sites in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia. It could have easily been sited in Ohio as it could have been sited in West Virginia. So we take that seriously. We are a regional feedstock. The natural gas liquids are under all of our borders. We're all competing for the same thing. But how do we grow this so that every state has an opportunity? Because we have to be in this together. And I hope that you all realize that infrastructure crosses state borders. Workforce crosses state borders. Feedstock crosses state borders. It is imperative that we work as a region and not as individual states competing against one another for investments that will benefit all of us. So I want to start there with the premise behind it. The Memorandum of Understanding, the initial one that created this sort of government economic development group, was signed in 2015 by the governors of Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia. It was re-signed in 2018 at the World Petrochemical Conference in Houston. Why did we pick Houston to re-sign this? Because it was an international conference on petrochemicals, and I am here to tell you we are a player in the international market. So don't lose sight of that. This is big stuff. So I just blew through this slide in just to show you there is real work being done at a very high level, and it gives Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia the platform of our 3 collective governors who are supporting growth of the petrochemical industry in our 3 states. We work primarily across a couple of platforms. Oh, I want to stop here. I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself. One thing I said that would be on these slides and why this is so important. I've been using this slide, unfortunately, for 3 years. I wanted to stop using this slide. That's my mission, and I know it's the mission of my colleagues as well. This is the Marcellus and Utica footprint in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia. And we've got a couple of pipelines on there, most of which you should have heard about. Mariner East 1 and 2 goes from Houston, Pennsylvania, over to Marcus Hook in Philadelphia. So someone asked the question of why it's a Philadelphia issue. Because we're taking NGLs to Philadelphia on a cross-state pipeline. We also have the Appalachian Texas pipeline, which also goes from that nexus in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia down to the United States Gulf Coast. And we have something called Mariner West, which is the extension of Mariner East 1 and 2, except it's going to Sarnia, Canada. The ethane that we are producing in this basin is 100% being exported to end-use markets. That only changes when Shell is constructed and begins processing ethane to make high-density polyethylene and low linear density polyethylene. And that's in 2021, 2022. So how many of you think that that's not a good proposition to be exporting all of our resources? That is why Jerry's here to talk about Forge the Future, because we recognize that the value is in using the feedstock to create resins, to create opportunities for manufacturing here, as opposed to other places of the world where it's already been done, or already being done. So I'm going to reflect really quickly. I know there's been some discussion of this today. This is just the graph that shows how much ethane we have in this basin, and Pennsylvania DCED with our partner Team Pennsylvania Foundation did a report back in 2017. I haven't seen any changes to these numbers. Generally, they're consistent with what Martha from American Chemistry Council put up today. This just shows the ethane availability that is coming out of this region projected through 2030. And if you see the numbers 2 and 3, these graphs are for the Marcellus. So it takes, let me back up, it takes 90,000 barrels per day for a world-class ethane cracker. So this is showing that in the Marcellus and Utica, in addition to Shell, we can have 3 additional based on the volume of ethane. So the excess is about 270,000. The Utica has about 90,000 to 100,000, so we can add 1 more to this. So in addition to Shell, we can have 4 additional ethane crackers based on availability of ethane, or we can ship it out. So that's our choice. It's really not our choice, it's the choice of some others making those decisions, but we'd really like to sway them, if we could, to get some use here. This is an article from Energy in Depth. I put it up here because I wanted you to see the question being posed, and that is, could the Appalachian Basin be the next Silicon Valley of American energy infrastructure? This is the same graph showing ethane production in the basin, and you're going to see it leveling out. So this critical inflection point is what we need to grab onto. So once we get into that static production, we have some opportunities here. So I think it's important to reflect on that. One of the key things, which I'm only going to talk briefly on because I know my colleagues will speak to it in much more detail than I will. But one of the major components of our IHS report looked to the need for an Appalachian storage and trading hub in the region. That it is essentially critical that you have a place to store ethane in times of up and down for plants. Now Shell was able to make the decision absent a storage and trading hub. They will have a 92-mile pipeline and they have 10 suppliers of ethane. It might be 14, somewhere between 10 and 14, but they had to ink a lot of contracts to ensure that their ethane supply was fluid and solid.
So we want to make that decision easier for others coming into this region so that we have the proper infrastructure to support additional activity. And this is a regional need. So if you go back to, yes, Shell chose to locate here, there's going to be other crackers that may choose to locate in Ohio and West Virginia, but a storage hub helps all 3 states. And the American Chemistry Council has also reported on this through their studies. And the last piece that I want to leave you with on the market conditions are that we talked a lot about whether or not there can be advanced opportunities in plastics here in this region. Well, we strategically sit within 700 miles of 70% of the plastics industry. That's why Shell chose to locate here. So the question is always, well, where is Shell's pellets going? Will they help manufacturing here? Yes and no. They're going to ship some of those abroad to international markets. They're going to ship some to other markets in the US. Probably some of them will be heading west to that big bubble that's orange. Some of them may be in PA, some of them may be in Ohio, some of them may be in West Virginia. But a $6 billion investment does have multiplier effects. And so there will be a rise in the industry. But again, it just goes back to the point I'm trying to make at the beginning, which is it all starts with feedstock. And if you're not using feedstock to produce resins, there's no end point for additional manufacturing opportunities related to that resins production. Okay, this is where I stop. So I'm going to, do you want me to do this slide?
No, that's fine.
You'll do it? Okay, Corey's going to take this one. Please allow me to introduce Corey Dennison from Vision Shared in West Virginia. He's been an on-the-ground advocate with our group and works directly with the West Virginia Department of Commerce, who is my counterpart. And so I'm going to turn it over and let him talk about the structure of the Tri-State Shale Coalition.
Thank you very much, Denise. And I have to say, part of the reason we've even been able to do all this is because we're very lucky to have great state workers and people that see the vision like Denise, and I really appreciate working with Denise and Paul and everyone in our group, and it's been a learning experience for me, and I appreciate you very much. Thank you. So I also appreciate, this is my first time in Titusville. It's my first time in this part of Pennsylvania, actually, and some of you maybe are asking, why is somebody from West Virginia even speaking? But I love that, and excuse me, my allergies, I love it up here, but my allergies don't. So I appreciate that as I've sat through this conference, and last night a few of us were speaking, how regionalism keeps coming up. And Lance talked about the importance of regionalism, and Deb and many other people, and that's something you don't hear about in other parts of the country, and we're lucky to have that. I grew up, one of my first jobs right out of college was working with Ashland Marathon Oil. I lived in Huntington, West Virginia. We crossed the Big Sandy River every day to go over to Ashland Oil in Ashland, Kentucky and work. So to me, I've always grown up in a regional idea. In Huntington, you cross the river to Ohio, you cross the river to Kentucky every day. It shocked me as I kind of started pushing this group and working with these people that I don't think the rest of the country really views it that way. So I appreciate that this conference and the people in this room understand that taking a regional approach to the shale gas that we have under our feet right now is very important because the Marcellus and Utica shale definitely doesn't see state lines, right? So why should we approach this from viewing state lines and taking that approach? So with that being said, as you look at this map, our region for the Tri-State Shale Coalition, I'm in Charleston, which is about right here. Paul's from Cleveland. We have people from Pittsburgh and Pennsylvania all over. So you can kind of see on the map the region that we have is basically the Marcellus shale part of the southern half of it. And several years ago, we came to the conclusion that a cracker plant in Parkersburg, West Virginia helps Marietta, Ohio. A cracker plant in Bel Air, Ohio helps Moundsville, West Virginia. And a cracker plant in Beaver, Pennsylvania helps Wheeling, West Virginia. Just like increased manufacturing in Youngstown, Ohio would help this region, and so on and so forth. So taking that regional approach, I began working with several different other nonprofits, Team Neo, Paul, the Allegheny Conference. We now work with Dave Rufusberger and Cecilia. And Pat Bennett and Pat Getty of the Benedum Foundation, we titled him Mr. Regionalism because he's really brought us all together. But I had just left the governor's office. I worked for Governor Tomlin. He understood the importance of regionalism and allowed me to have a quick conversation with Governor Kasich. And then from that, we were lucky enough to get Governor Wolf on board. So all of this happened almost serendipitously. And I think many of you in business can kind of understand that when that happens, it's because it should, right? And this should have happened. This should be happening. So with that, we all moved forward and started the Tri-State Shale Coalition. We were lucky to get the Appalachian Regional Agreement signed, and that agreement actually gave then the nonprofits and the state agencies the ability to work with the other states. I can't say it enough. This isn't happening anywhere else in the country. 3 states are not working together to try to maximize their economic growth. Okay, prosperity flows where value is added is a term that we talk about a lot in our group. And I think being from West Virginia, I think me and my fellow West Virginians inherently understand that if you do not add value to what you're pulling out of the ground, you're not going to get the prosperity that then comes with it. And you can see that by what's happening in southern West Virginia right now. So we want this is a generational opportunity to get that downstream opportunity, the downstream manufacturing that can come with the gas that we're pulling out of the ground. Okay, so under that, in the Tri-State Shale Coalition, we have several different areas that we work on. I'm going to start kind of from the bottom and work my way up. So research, innovation, and commercialization. One of the things we're doing is, from an innovation standpoint, the 4-year institutions are all in the process of signing an agreement together. Again, it doesn't happen very often. Ohio State, WVU, Penn State, Pitt, they're actually signing agreements to share their information, share their research, and work together. We work with Dr. Brian Anderson, who leads a lot of that effort out of WVU. Some of you may know him. He leads the Energy Institute at WVU. From the workforce side, so many of you in this room are workforce, labor people. This is a very important and critical aspect. Jim DeNova from the Benedum Foundation is doing a lot of good work, and he's actually bringing together the 2-year institutions and again the 4-year institutions. They've actually signed agreements. I know I went to a 2-year college in, what was the name of that one we went to in Paul? Sorry. Steubenville, Ohio, sorry. And Pierpont and Fairmont, West Virginia, they're all working together to try to make sure that we're training the people and the workforce that we need to have. Transportation and infrastructure. This is a very important committee that we have moving forward. Denise briefly mentioned this, but the underground storage hub is very important to all of our efforts. She mentioned the Shell cracker plant and the contracts that they have to get the access to the ethane that they need. Pennsylvania has coined a term that I like to use, I've borrowed. It's called boutique manufacturing facility, right? These are facilities under $100 million. They don't have the capital and the ability to go out and lay miles and miles of underground pipeline to get the ethane that they need. Sometimes that can be as much as $700,000 a mile for laying that pipeline. So we have to provide access to the ethane, access to the methane, and that becomes a very critical point in hoping that we get the downstream opportunities that we want. Also, some of the things that we're working on in transportation, underground, the pipelines between the states. So in West Virginia, in Ohio, we're having conversations right now about running pipeline under the Ohio River. For those of you that don't know, West Virginia actually owns the Ohio River to 9 miles to the Ohio border. So we're already working between the 2 states to kind of lay the groundwork for running pipelines under the river. Again, another access issue is 4-lane roads. 4-lane roads, broadband internet actually plays into this from if you're trying to recruit businesses to get to the area. If you don't have high-speed internet, if you don't have 4-lane roads, if you don't have the access to the ethane, they're not going to locate in that area. The last one I'm going to talk about is marketing the region. So this is important. What's the point of the 3 states coming together? The main reason is that we want to go out and the ability to attract businesses to even begin looking at the region, whether they be in Europe or in Asia or wherever, to begin looking at our region and saying, here's what we have to offer. This has also been the most difficult. The first problem that we ran into, like running into a brick wall, was what do we call the region? Right? As you're sitting here right now, what is this region called? And it's easy. Everybody for Texas, Louisiana, it's the Gulf, right? Everybody knows the Gulf. And you call it that for a variety of reasons, because of vacation travel brochures, because the industry itself calls it the Gulf, right? But what are we? Cleveland isn't in the Appalachian Mountains. West Virginia is happy to be called Appalachia, but we don't want to be called the Great Lakes region, right? We're nowhere near there. So the biggest problem we've had is really determining what do we call our area. Excuse me. And I'm looking at Jerry Thompson because he's been very patient during this process. We're actually using Mark USA to develop a branding, which I'll get into in just a minute. And Jerry's been herding cats as we walk down this process. But I think we're finally starting to come to a point where we can find something to call what we're doing. Developing a brand. We started this process by conducting research and talking to business leaders about how we should approach the marketing plan, what we should call the region, how we should go through this process. We conducted interviews. We went down a process of evaluating what our pros and cons are. What is it that we can show business and industry why they should come to this region? And we've, all the speakers have gone over this. Number 1 is cheap gas, right? Number 2 is proximity, convergence of cheap labor, cheap gas, and being near market. So we're near the feedstock, we're near the market, and all of that is what should attract business to the area. Developing the brand. So now we are in the process of how do we actually go out and market the region. We're going to begin going to conferences. We've started working on print material. We started a website. We're going down that whole process of, as any business is doing daily, how do we market our region? How do you market your brand? So what? Can you tell them we need their help? And we need your help doing that. Absolutely. Denise is right as she whispers over here. We need your help. She started this off by saying, how many people have even heard of the Tri-State Show Coalition? And each time she's done that, I've noticed more hands going up. But we need your help to really pitch this, to pitch the idea of regionalism, to pitch the idea of the 3 states. So in wrapping up, I'd also like to give a quick update of things happening in West Virginia, right? So one of the, not only are we looking at petrochemical related in the plastics industry, a big plant right now is being built in Charleston, West Virginia, where I live, Methanol USA. And so you're seeing the benefits of the cheap gas as far south as Charleston, West Virginia, with the Methanol USA plant. Also in our region, we're very excited about the Rogersville Shale. It may not directly affect you all as much up here, but they have found exploratory wells in Cabell County and Wayne County, West Virginia, for the Rogersville Shale, and we expect that to begin booming very soon. So, and then finally, everybody asked me about the Parkersburg cracker plant, right? And I'll be honest, there doesn't seem to be a lot of movement on that, but we still are hoping for that. We think the region can support between 3 and 5 cracker plants, and we really want to create a petrochemical hub or cluster. And it would not be great to just have 1 cracker plant. We don't want it just sitting there by itself. We want to attract 3 to 5. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Paul Bouvier of Team NEO, and I've been working with him now for about 3 years. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Corey. Can you see me? I'll move over here like Denise. So thanks for having me. It's a pleasure. I guess if I look across the audience and, a couple of big takeaways, I'd really say it. Unprecedented opportunity for this region. Transformational, something like I've never seen. I've been 43 years in the petrochemical and plastics industry. We are now at a period where we are we are cost advantage, we have customers in the region, and now we've got, hopefully, getting stakeholders and ambassadors like you all involved in this, getting to develop a shared vision for us on what this region should look like and where we want to go. So when you look at what brought us together as the Tri-State Shale Coalition, it was really seeing that opportunity and beginning to develop that shared vision between us. And we hope that it's a little bit contagious and you guys can start to grasp it and work with us to help us realize it. Because it's a complicated message, it's a lot of work, and it's a complicated value chain to pull together. I'll talk about transportation and infrastructure. So Corey and Denise have already talked about demand in the region, why it's important for us to develop a name that ultimately is going to evolve into a brand that we can build on. So I'll talk about the other 3 areas that the Tri-State Shale Coalition is working on. So if you look at transportation and infrastructure, one of the things that we see early on, which is really a speed bump, for the region, is how do you mitigate risk when you're looking at building petrochemical companies in the region and attracting them to the region? So how do you mitigate risk in terms of having surge capacity and be able to manage flow of this valuable asset that comes out of the ground? So one of the things we saw was important is looking at roads and rail for sure, but also looking at a storage hub. So one of the things that we were able to do is, between our group and probably 14 other companies, raise enough money to get our 3 geological surveys together. So the Geological Survey in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia, coming together as a team. We raised about $200,000 to develop a study to see where are potential areas that we could store ethane and other natural gas liquids as we go forward. So we did that work, commissioned an 18-month study. Our friend Brian Anderson at West Virginia and the Energy Institute acted as the quarterback, but we had all 3 states working together around that. And what you see is up here is the results of that study. Good news is there's 3 strong areas because of the Geological Survey. I'm not a geologist, I'm a plastics engineer, so I can't tell you all of the issues, the opportunities around the strata, but suffice it to say that we've got tremendous storage capability here. And now one of the things that I know our friends in West Virginia are leading right now is an effort on how do you develop and engage private industry to look at that opportunity. We have a company called Mountaineer Storage that's already looking at a facility to store in these areas, but we're looking to engage other companies to do that. What they're also working on is working with the federal government on a regional basis to see if we can backstop a loan guarantee program so that you can entice companies to begin participate on the front end of investing, but then at least you've got a backstop on the back end to help support that going forward. So a lot more to come around that. Oh, thank you. You already did it already, and that's why it's a team. So right now that they're looking at developing that initial phase of funding to look at how do we interconnect and store a lot of these materials going forward. And right now we're looking at a phased work, both to mitigate some of the financial risk on the front end, but also to focus on the best sectors and the best building blocks and feedstocks to store. So we'll move on to the next one is workforce. I know something near and dear to everybody's heart. The third area is workforce, because coming from the industry, these plants don't run themselves. It's great that we have a lot of computers and advanced technology to run them, but you need people at the end of the day. You need trained people. One of the things that's resulted from our collaboration is a group called the TEAM Consortium. It's Tri-State Energy and Advanced Manufacturing Consortium. There's probably a number of people in the room here, and it's involved with dozens of trade, 2-year, 4-year universities that are working together right now to collaborate and develop what we call stackable credentials. So when you're building a petrochemical or any kind of manufacturing facility, people can see that you can progress from a plant operator to get training in CNC or welding or advanced process manufacturing or systems and controls. And what they're building right now is that kind of network and collaboration so that we can work across state across regions so that, the funding doesn't stop at a state line. Because generally, as we see this play building out, no different than a cracker plant, these people are going to be looking at talent, across state borders because the pool isn't big enough in one place. I don't care if you're in the Gulf Coast, the pool still isn't big enough in one place to be able to attract that. So if you look at companies like Shell, they're taking a broader reach right now. I was asked to participate in a meeting, didn't even get a chance to tell Denise this, with the folks at Shell to University of Akron, because they're looking at the talent reaching out there. Great schools at Carnegie Mellon, great schools at Pitt. I'm an alum of Pitt for some graduate work, and so that we've got a great, so just truth, full disclosure. But I think that we've got something that we don't play out enough, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But I think that group right now, and I guess I would just to get it on your radar for those who are interested in workforce, there's a session coming up on October 17th, I believe it is, or November. It's October, November. Did I put it on there? I didn't put it on there, but look for that, and I believe it's November 17th, and what they're going to be doing, and our aim is to invite manufacturers there to really make sure that that team is best plugged in to be able to refine the model around the stackable credentials and making sure that they're really getting a whole other level of better engagement with companies, because at the end of the day, those have to work hand in hand for us to be able to train the people with the right skills that we need to build out this play. And then the last slide, thank you, Denise, is around research, innovation, and commercialization. As I said, I get an opportunity to work with a lot of the universities in the region, and we are competitively advantaged in this space. We don't talk about it enough. So one of the things that we're developing now is a memo of understanding with Carnegie Mellon, with Case, with Ohio State, with Penn State. We're talking with Akron and a number of other universities to get them to be able to showcase and develop and show the competitive advantages that we have. Not just talk about the pure research, which is really important and good to do, but the applied research that's relevant to the petrochemical and plastics industry. And if you're a Shell, why you should locate here, because we'll have the technical expertise, the professional expertise, and the trained people coming out of our talent pool, which we just talked about, that's going to help them make money, be sustainable at it, and grow to meet their customers' needs. So with that, I think that's it, other than to thank you. And if you have any questions, I'm glad Denise is here to answer them. Thank you.
Questions?
How close are we to having an underground storage facility? And in the absence of that, is it going to hamper things in the short term?
Who wants to answer it?
You want me to tackle it?
One other thing, who will own and or operate them? Will that be private?
Yes.
Concern?
Yes. Oh, no, thank you. Yeah, so they can see me. Yeah. Well, first question first, it'll be years, to be honest. Okay, so because I think between getting the pipelines done, getting the agreements done, it's going to be years. But if you don't start, then that will can hamper growth even more. Where it'll be, in one of the 3 circles that are up there right now. I know, because it's public knowledge right now, Mountaineer is looking at the lowest, the one right on the Ohio side of that circle. But there are a lot of other people that are expressing interest, private industry as well. I think the other thing is it's really a function of what business talks about in terms of the need for this and how it comes forward, because we're in that a bit of a catch-22 dilemma, right? Until we get a critical mass of companies stepping up and saying, yes, we see the potential for this, we're willing to put some money down, working in collaboration with our regional players at the state, then that's what it's going to take. I don't have a crystal ball. Why we're here, part of why we're here today, is to get you all thinking about it. So as you work with companies and we can engage them to pull through and to to seize the opportunity, then it'll happen. If we're not good at generating that interest and showing a shared vision, Shell's found a way to mitigate the risk, and that's a good thing. I think that other players, if they come in, if PTT ultimately decides as yes, when they're planning, they're looking at ways to mitigate that risk going forward. That's just what business people do. But it's hard to say how that'll play out, but we'll see. But I think you have to walk before you can run. The walking part is we know the capabilities there. Right now, it's a question of just keeping pace with the pull-through.
If I can add an additional point of clarification as well. Mountaineering is pursuing its own storage hub, separate and independent of the Appalachian Development Group. Yep. So the Appalachian Development Group, first of all, Mountaineer's storage will not be sufficient to supply the whole basin. So it's a smaller storage facility, and the Appalachian Development Group has stepped in and is looking to build a bigger one to take a bigger bite of the apple. That's being headed by a quasi, I guess, public-private partnership between a foundation at the University of West Virginia and a private sector company named Matrix. So they've already made it through phase 1 of the DOE loan guarantee process. The Secretary of DOE has been advocating for this particular project to be included in that loan guarantee process because it is a project that promotes resiliency. It was brought into the process right about the time that Harvey hit the Gulf Coast. And so it became very clear when petrochemical facilities that are all located in one part of the country go down, there's an issue with supply. And so it couldn't have happened at a better time that we had a DOE loan guarantee application going through the process. They have just announced an EPC entity,
last week,
Parsons Engineering, and they will be helping to submit the phase 2 of the DOE loan guarantee application, and I think that the end split on that will be 60% loan guarantee to 40% private equity. It's a several $billion-dollar project in the $5 to $6 billion, so hopefully that adds a little bit more flavor to the conversation.
I have a question, and Paul, maybe you can answer it, and that is, can you just explain to everybody what the process is for storage as far as what they have to do?
Oh boy. Well,
I just find that very interesting.
Yeah, well, I think the whole process is that first you have to decide on, okay, who are the players to decide what's going to be stored. Okay, it's going to be ethane, propane, butane, natural gas liquid. So there's a mix there that'll dictate what's above ground, right? Then you still have to determine what are the pipelines that are going to feed that and where those sources are going to come from. Then it's a question of what's the strata below ground. How is it in terms of size? How is it in terms of the rock formation? Because the rock formation can dictate how much and how easy it is to, in terms of cost basis, to dig it out. And then you have to get all of those things aligned, let alone making sure that it's safe from an environmental perspective, from a people perspective. So it's like building another manufacturing facility, really. But now you're building some of it above ground, some of it below ground.
The survey that was done by several universities and I believe led by WVU, but all 3 states, they actually looked for salt wells that they could then you could pump water in to pull the salt out, and then creates like an underground cave that you can store the facility in. So,
other questions?
Can I also give a pitch? So the Tri-State Shale Coalition is going to have our Tri-State Shale Summit. This will be our 4th in Morgantown, West Virginia at the Waterfront Place Hotel on December 12th. We'd love to have you. I'm sure you'll be hopefully getting some emails on that soon. If not, feel free to contact any one of us and we'll get you the information.
I wanted to thank Denise for her kind words about Deb and I, but that's not a reality. The reality is it's the hub. And what I'd like to do is have those hub members who are here, please stand up. I know you're there, don't be shy. It has taken the volunteer work of a great deal of individuals from various walks of life to keep this going for 10 years. And we wanted to make sure that we noted that it is all the other individuals who have really been responsible. And there's a lot more that some have already left, but we wanted to make sure we acknowledge them. But thank you for your kind words. If there are no other questions, I'm going to now turn it over to Susan Heilman, one of our hub members.
Thanks, Lance. It is my distinct privilege to announce our next speakers. The Northwest IRC, the Industrial Resource Center, as many of you may know, is one of 7 centers across the state. I also know we have Erica Frischman in the back. She's from Capitalist Connection, one of our sister agencies in Pittsburgh. And our job is really to focus specifically on manufacturing. How can we help companies position them to really understand and take advantage of this opportunity? Because it's a great opportunity. Everyone keeps saying once in a lifetime, and it truly is. And we want to make sure that our manufacturers are up to speed and are aware and are giving thought to what can I do? You know, do I have core competencies that I can take and move from where I'm at right now into another industry, into an emerging industry, into a growing industry? So one of the companies that we reached out to was Bechtel, who many of you know are connected with the Shell plant. So it's my privilege to introduce Steve Spoljaric and,
right?
and Justin Price. They are with the procurement and purchasing for Bechtel, and they're going to talk to us. For those of you who are manufacturers and for those of you who work with manufacturers, you know, we need to encourage them to move beyond where they're at right now. And so they're going to help us understand what that looks like. Where does that need to be? Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for having us. We're going to talk about a couple different things, and again, the focus on manufacturing and vendors in this region and globally on how Bechtel really works and plans our business. First, we just want to do a little introduction. Justin?
I'll make it quick. So, I am from Texas. You can tell from my boots. But I've been up here for about just over a year. Brought my family up with me. I have lived in other places. So far, we've really enjoyed it up here. Found everyone very warm and friendly. It does get a little cool, but you know, change is good.
And again, Steve Spoljaric, I go by Spo, although I also moved here from Houston, originally from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And I think one of the things that, you know, we both wanted to share, Justin's been in lots of different places for Bechtel. I've been only at Bechtel about half the time Justin has, but I've come from industry, worked for a manufacturer, and have a background really in logistics. So I think we'll try to share different perspectives on how we really look at evaluating vendors and how we pick our work. Kind of the theme for today is, and you can read for yourself, but I was inspired earlier when we were talking about years and what happened in certain years. So we heard in 2004 was the first well for Marcellus Shale, right? So I wanted to put that in perspective a little bit. So we're going to have crowd participation now for everyone that's tired, ready to go home. What year, and yell it out please, were the Pittsburgh Steelers started? Guess. 33, they're right.
Their first punter came from Titusville.
What's that?
Their first punter came from Titusville.
Perfect. When did they win their first championship? 72, right? Took 40 years till they became winners, right? Okay, now some more fun. What year was the Slinky created? Come on. When? 62. Wrong. One more guess. 1943, and I'll come back to why that's important. Okay, first video game. Quick guesses. 1958. First cell phone. 73. First MP3, MP4 file. 79. All right. First portable MP3, MP4 player. 1997. All right. When was the first time somebody put it all together into a cell phone that could take pictures and listen to music or video? 1999. Right. 6 or 5 years before the first well was dug. Right. Now the next question is, when was Bechtel created? When did we start? Anyone know? One guess? 1898, right? So a long time before even the Slinky. But the scary thing is, so the Slinky hasn't advanced since 1943, right? cell phone technology has, right? But the 3 primary locks and dams that we have to cross through to deliver very, very large equipment to all the projects we're talking about. Does anyone know when the Montgomery Lock was built? 1936, before the Slinky, right? So I leave that with you. We won't get into any more specifics than that, but think about what's transpired, at least for Bechtel in our 120 years. But in the region, when you talk about these projects, you have locks and dams that need to support everything we're talking about, and really, really good infrastructure, but locks and dams that are older than the invention of the Slinky. Okay, so just think about that as we get into some topics. Okay, does anyone know what that is? We're going to talk just a few seconds about Bechtel. Anyone recognize that? All right. So we're getting some good marketing, so pay attention to YouTube. It is our 120th anniversary this year, so literally every day in the month of September there's new stuff getting released. So if you are interested on some of the extraordinary projects we've built, they're in the press every single day. But I wanted to share that though, because not a lot of people know Bechtel, right? So we've been one of the biggest construction companies for a long time, but we're an engineering, procurement, and construction company. And a lot of people think about the construction part. We also do, engineering and procurement, and there's a lot of aspects within each one of those groups. And as we said earlier, we'll focus really on the procurement piece of it, but it is 100% influenced by engineering and constructability of our plants. And as you can see, Justin will talk in a few minutes about all the different places where we build projects and why that's important, I think, for manufacturers in this region, not just locally, but globally, and the type of work we're doing. We are still family owned. A lot of people don't know that. So 5th generation owner, Brendan, very engaged and looking to lead where his father, Riley, really put a focus on safety in the construction industry. His focus is on sustainability. So as we talk about different things and how we evaluate vendors and work with vendors, what sort of things have always been important to us and what kind of new things are important to us. Again, just wanted to make sure we're putting everything into the right perspective. Hey, Justin.
By the way, Brendan is what, only 2 years older than me?
Yeah. He'll be around for a while.
So, yeah, I'm glad we did take a moment to cover Bechtel, because I always joke that Bechtel is one of the biggest companies you've never heard of. We're privately owned. But we do a lot of neat things, and we're glad to be here. We're glad we got invited here. So this is just a high-level overview of an important symbol to our organization that we'd like to think is an important reason why our customers put a lot of faith in the work that we do and the results that we provide. And the focus here, of course, is how does that flow down to our suppliers? So we have a customer as well as many other stakeholders in these big jobs that we have to consider. Ethics, safety, quality. I mean, okay, of course, I'm sure this is the first time you've heard this before, but when you're dealing with large jobs, you can't say it enough. And our customers expect it from us. We have to expect it from our suppliers. So it's a top to bottom expectation, and it's critically important to our success from the top down. So here's a quick overview of more about the company itself. We're over 30 billion in revenue, 45,000 employees worldwide, 1,500 in supply chain, 125 customers, many projects in many countries. So you'll see here, Houston and Reston are two of our major revenue centers. Glendale's another one. We were headquartered actually in San Francisco up until about, 6 months ago. Now we're in Reston, for those of you who weren't aware of that. We're also going to get into, so on the far right here, you can see how diverse we are in terms of geography. As far as our mix of spend, North America is 60%, Asia Pacific 11%. EAMS is an internal acronym for Europe, Africa, Middle East. So within, I guess to take a quick step back before I dive into this one, and the Reston, that's more of our government-focused side, power. With oil and gas, we have different business lines, mining, metals, telecoms. Oil and gas is just one of those business lines. Within that business line, we have other areas of focus such as LNG, onshore, petrochemicals, pipelines, and tanks. And this has really been a blessing for us as an organization. As you know, with these big projects, you're really at the whims of the market. So being diversified is critically important to our success. So this is a slide we had to add in here as we go, I guess, closer into our topic of discussion here, which is involved with supply chain. And I guess a fun analogy I guess I could use for this one is think of restaurants, or say you want to go out for a burger with some friends. Go to Burger King, or you could go to a real nice burger joint. Good, cheap, fast. So you can only pick two, but you can't have all three. Right? So that's kind of the punchline of this slide. And you can apply this to many aspects of business as well. But again, it's a pretty simple concept, but I think in most cases holds true. All right, so here's a process flow diagram, and I'm sure you're expecting or you're wanting me to go through each one of these steps so you can fall asleep on me. Actual point is, yes, we've been doing this a long time, as Bo suggested, but yeah, the basics of the process still hold true. Obviously, we still value experience in terms of our employees.
Truth is, that's a screenshot, I think, from a 1990 presentation. So,
but our industry, like all industries, are evolving. And there are some exciting things happening as far as what we do on our projects in terms of how we apply technology. Supposing to get into more aspects of that are pretty exciting. I think most of you would find it pretty interesting as well. So going back to the iron diagram, responsible procurement. So procurement is one of those subjects that on the surface of it, it appears very simple, it appears very black and white. But for those of you in the room, and most of you have plenty of experience from what I can see, you know how things can get very complicated very quickly when it involves money or commercial decision making. That's why it's important, again, that you maintain an ethical standard as high as anyone else, and that you work with those that share those same values. This is another, that was a picture of a handbook, our ethics handbook that All of our employees are required to read and as well as attend workshops every single year. It's something we take very seriously. All right, so going into the quality aspect of that triangle, this, and I believe someone earlier that presented kind of touched on this earlier when it comes to capacity and how that influences quality. This is one of our key metrics, one of our key indicators in terms of when we're assessing suppliers is what's their current capacity, what's their current runway. You know, just like individuals, just like people, just like human beings, if we're being overworked, we're more likely to make a mistake. So, and beyond that, you know, given the size and the scale of these jobs, we have to be careful not to set folks up for failure. If you put too much work in there, and of course, there's going to be people out there that they're never going to say no. But in the end, it's not going to be a happy ending for you or them. And you really have to keep the future in mind in terms of forming long-term partnerships with these folks and making sure that you're not setting them up for failure and you're setting them up for success. So this is more about sustainability. This is probably something Spoke could probably lean more into than myself, but obviously sustainability is an important, and it kind of comes off the safety side. In our organization, safety and environmental are kind of tied together. But obviously this is a focus that we have to embrace as an organization, that our customers expect from us, and that we expect from our suppliers.
Yeah, I think the key in what we just showed you in the first couple slides, there's nothing really new, right? It's, you know, is price driving our decision, right? Usually that's what most people think is. In many cases, for the type of projects we're building, price is absolutely an element, but it's the schedule, right? Schedule can be so much more important, and if we don't have that confidence in a word that you know we don't like to use, but surety of outcome, a phrase, you know, are we sure? Are our clients sure with us that we're going to deliver something by a particular date so that they can actually go to business, right? It is about selling that end product and getting it to the market, and are they sure that we can deliver that to them? Are we sure that our plan is in line with being able to do that, and then flowing down to the vendors we partner with? And that's everything from manufacturers to service providers, logistics companies that need to be there to help deliver that promise. As we look through, you know, after cost and schedule, you know, safety's that other big thing. Risk. What kind of risks are associated with it? Have we really evaluated the risks associated with going with a brand new vendor we've never worked with before, and from our assessment has never done anything at the level that we would expect them to? And this is why you know, we've had a couple conversations in the last few days. The companies in this region, to be ready to handle what's coming, need to start working on the international projects now, right? Justin had mentioned we're in 30 different countries doing work. We did a lot of LNG projects in Australia, where the majority of the money that was being spent for those jobs was here in the U.S., and we were exporting stuff from the U.S. to Australia. Those smaller companies that want to be prepared to handle a large amount of work regionally, or to be that sub or third tier vendor locally for field orders, my recommendation is to start to understand now what you need to be ready to deal with. These other elements that come into play, like sustainability, you know, are you looking now, do you care for your employees, right? That's very important to us. It's very important to Brendan. You know, are you a good company to work with in general? Are you an easy company to work with? And then we'll get into the commercial aspects as well. Do you understand Incoterms, right? Who here in the room has ever heard of the term Incoterms? Just raise your hands, right? I'm involved with a couple different universities. I get really, really upset. You know, my wife calls me like a transportation nerd when I get in this, but I get really upset where they're not teaching Incoterms. And if you don't know Incoterms, you can't sign one of our contracts, right? We won't let you if you clearly don't understand what you're signing up for, because our evaluation of surety of outcome just drops right out of, drops right off the table. You need to understand what you're signing up for when you sign a contract with Bechtel, because we will hold you to it. And the expectation is that much of the language that are in those agreements are flowed down to us from our customers. So we understand what it means. We understand what we're buying, and we want to make sure you understand what you're selling. One of the examples of Incoterms, which we've seen mistakes. So if you're shipping something to a port, right, and again, let's talk about exporting maybe some goods from the U.S. And we use a term like FCA, port, right? So vendor signs up, says, yep, we'll deliver it to the port. Cool, great. Like, we know what that means. Okay, but what if we said FAS? Now you got to get your goods not just into the port, you got to get it right up alongside the ship. And if you have a decent order with us, you could have 500,000 truckloads of material that need to go to the port. If you miss that small step from getting it to where it entered the port point of rest to free alongside, you could be talking another $200 a truck that you didn't plan for, and before you know it, there's $100,000 right out of your bottom line that's gone, right? You're not going to get it back, and we're not going to play games later. It's what the contract says, and that's what you'll be held to. Worse, if we said FOB, and a lot of people get confused, that they think FOB, oh, I just got to load it in my shop. If we say FOB and we name Port of Baltimore, you have to get it onto the ship. All the costs associated and all the risk of loss associated with the material, getting it onto the ship is the vendor's responsibility. Now, I threw the slide engineered logistics. Bechtel's a little bit different in that a lot of companies like to outsource their transportation, right? That's kind of my background. We do it ourselves, right? And more than just getting it from A to B, we use the term engineered logistics because we want to make sure we're working with engineering and construction to really design the equipment with the vendor in a way that's going to be optimal for logistics. And again, I kind of point back to the reference to the locks and dams in the U.S. rivers, right? We will design equipment literally to fit within inches of the max capacity of those dams and locks, right? And it's so key because that can really have an influence on what the cost of these plants are and whether they're going to be feasible to go or not, okay? So I'm going to talk technology for a little bit. I'll come back to a few of these things, but I'll start with the universities. I am proud to say we just hired 2 students from Penn State Beaver, not main campus, in supply chain. So anyone that doesn't know, they now have 4-year degreed students at the Beaver campus, and I got to say we've done 2 semesters now with students, and we end up hiring 2 of them. So I encourage vendors and manufacturers, if you're not sure where to take your business and you want somebody to come in and help engage and maybe think of some new ideas on how to be competitive, consider bringing an intern in from one of these there are a lot of good local universities. Bring them in, try to get them to work with you and hire them. Pay them well, right, and see where they can help you, maybe in areas you haven't touched in a long time because, frankly speaking, they're getting a lot of new technology exposed to them all the time, right? So I'll start showing some of the technology. Technology's not working. There we go. All right, so has anyone heard of the Microsoft HoloLens? I'll say it slower. Microsoft HoloLens. So what you're seeing on the left is basically a 3D model of a ship. It'll eventually get there. And we're working with manufacturers to design equipment in 3D models so that we can do an engineered logistics approach and understand. Promise we'll keep going. You'll see in 1 second. You see a crane, you see a trailer, you see a turbine, and you see a ship, right? They're holograms. I'm sitting in the room while they're taking the video, can't see them. You put the augmented mixed reality headset on, you can see it because it's loaded with a 3D model of the plant, and he's extracted a piece of equipment that he wants to look at in greater detail. You'll see in a second, he can zoom in on a one-to-one, and if we were using it in this room, this entire room would be filled up with a piece of equipment, where if I was wearing the headset, I could see it. Now, we don't need every vendor to be able to do that, and Bechtel's not at a point where we're doing it for everything, but we're starting to inch into that sort of technology so that we can see things 2 years before they're built, when they're manufactured, and then we can start using technology at the top. If you've heard of LiDAR, where you can literally LiDAR scan, it's like radar but light, run a route and see what that route looks like, dimensionally accurate within the millimeter of what the size looks like, right? We can do the same thing inside our plant, where we can run LiDAR scans with drones. And again, I'm proud to say one of the students we just hired, we sponsored him to go get an FAA commercial drone license, so he told me he can't fly it over Heinz Field because I asked and he said he couldn't. But he can fly it in certain areas, and it's fully commercial license to do that. And I think as we look at the talent that we bring into our industry, how do you get students that want to come participate, that think of things that you haven't thought of, and you may look at it and say, well, it seems like a lot of waste of money. Drones aren't very expensive. The license, $150, right? Studying time a little bit different, but the actual license is cheap. What do we do now? We don't have to go out to a third party and not have no awareness of how things work. We can go straight to this individual. He can go get his drone. He'll get an hour of overtime at the end of the day when everyone goes home. He'll fly, lay down yards, and we can physically see now where we have areas where we may be able to merge, right? He can go fly when they're going to go set a piece of equipment. It's 150 feet up in the air. Instead of putting a person in harm's way, the operator can sit on the ground now and actually see from the drone where they're setting that piece of equipment. So really cool stuff. From our perspective, though, is we want to apply that back into the vendor shops, right? Do we need a person sitting, like Justin talked about shop utilization, do we need to have, today I think the number is around 400 shop expediters all over the world to go in and check your quality? Or can you wear a pair of smart glasses that are Skype enabled, and the engineer can sit in the home office and you can walk him around the piece of equipment, or we can fly a drone around it and see it just as good as us physically being there. So I think as we look at vendors and you say, okay, other than cost, risk, and schedule, what other things are starting to become more important to us? If you come to us and you have that sort of technology that's not very expensive, but you need to know how to use it, and you can provide that sort of information to us, that's going to help differentiate you between the next guy that has the same price and the same schedule and lying about their shop utilization, right? One of the other things, just to maybe get you thinking a bit.
How may I assist you today?
Becca, when is my pipe arriving?
Your pipe is scheduled to arrive on Saturday, January 7th at 10:40 a.m. Do you wish to repeat this message?
No, thank you.
Thank you and have a great day.
Awesome. So that's me. I was surprised. So they found out that the Siri code is free, right? Anyone that knows this sort of stuff can go do it. And we had a couple people on our team say, could we use this? We talked earlier about, as a test, they loaded a weld inspection, right? Full-blown weld inspection to a Siri type, we call it Becca, where they can ask a question like, how often you have to go get your eyes checked in order to still be certified. It'll tell you on page 22 of the manual, you don't have to go find it or look it up, it'll answer the question, just like you would use in your everyday life to find out whether the Blue Canoe is open on Mondays or not, right? They're not open, by the way. So we use that sort of technology every day, and we don't even really think about it, yet we get to work and we're thumbing through pages and pages of a manual to try to figure out what the spec is for welding. Or in this case, I got to make 10 phone calls to find out where's that urgent pipe at. I can buy diapers online through Amazon, and I know exactly where they're at, yet I can spend lots of money on other equipment at work, and I can't find it. I don't know where it's at. So that real sort of feedback, real-time understanding of where your material is, and that goes not just for construction to support them, right? They're the ones usually asking, where's my stuff? It's back to the vendor, right? When the SQ person is trying to evaluate when's your next inspection test or viewpoint coming up, do they have to call and beg and kind of negotiate when it is, or is that information flow going to kind of push? And I think as we get more and more into other technology uses, that's where you're going to see the big benefit, and again, a differentiator for the vendors that understand what it is and understand how to use it will drastically help Bechtel expand on who we use and how we use them. Okay, so we just wanted to kind of summarize. Again, safety, quality, and ethics, Justin touched on it a couple times. Without that, there's nothing. And it's like most things, again, in your daily life, if someone gives you a reason to not trust them, it's going to be hard to work with them, right? And Bechtel was very much the same way. I think, Justin can probably give you lots of examples of vendors that, we probably wanted to win the work. And when we started digging into the details of what they offered, we ethically couldn't work with them, right? And as much as, we can say, I'm local, I'm right here, I can do it, when you really, really evaluate it, it scares me sometimes to wonder, would we put that company literally out of business? Could they actually handle the type of work we would put in front of them? And I know it's easy to say yes, but I think, just like we said, it took 40 years for the Steelers to win a championship. Sometimes it takes a while for a company to get up to that level to be willing to work with a company like Bechtel or some of our other competitors. Cost rate schedule, that doesn't change, right? That's the baseline of what we look at. And then sustainability, right? Are you really into this for a long period of time? Do you have good financials, right? Are you caring for your people? Are you doing all the right things to be a good company? And to be honest, we'll drive companies crazy asking them all these questions, but we want to know, right? So instead of waiting until we come and ask, right? Tell us, right? Come show us. We recently did an evaluation between 2 local companies. One came in, they sat down, they put a safety manual down, they explained their organization, how they manage safety, they presented it to us, right? Went into the next company, and the guy says, we're the safest company in the region, just tell us what you want and we'll do it. And we all kind of like scratched our heads like, you don't want to be rude, but at the same time, the trust level was not there with one of the companies. And price-wise, they were better, right? They probably should have won the work. They didn't present themselves in a way that we could rationalize even going to the second level discussion with them. Global competitiveness, I would say if you don't win work regionally to supply work here, look at supplying your goods overseas, right? We heard about trade imbalances. We will source from the right company, right? It's not always the best company, it's not always the worst company, but we'll source from the right company for our projects, for what the needs are. And you got to remember, very often we will have XM loans where we're doing work overseas where we have to use U.S. vendors and supply. So again, that's something to pay attention to as well. And then again, the willingness to adapt to change. I guess that means we're done. Did I hit the button? Battery. Test. Test. All right, I'm loud enough. So I think just the ability to be willing to adapt to change. Clearly there's going to be change in the region. How that gets worked and gets managed, I think, is key, and how people interact with companies like ourselves from a professional perspective, and understanding, who's really driving some of the decisions. Sometimes we'll have a customer standing right behind us, and we can make a recommendation, we can have the greatest relationship, but at the end of the day, they may be the ones that are making the decision. So again, we like to be transparent, make sure companies know that, and at the same time, make sure we understand what you're good at and what kind of work you actually want to win. Justin, anything else you'd like to add?
I would just say that trust is probably the single most important thing that 2 parties who are looking to do business. Microphone's out. Trust is the single most important thing 2 parties can use when it comes to doing business. Bottom line. All things aside, all these fun things to talk about, if you want to work together, you have to trust each other. A lot of times in my experience, things like terms and conditions, you get into the room and we're getting hung up on what if that, what if this, what if that. And I get it, especially if you've never worked with us before, but it's not a good way to start, because there's a million what ifs we could talk about for days on end. You got to start somewhere, and it's the suppliers that have consistently performed for us, and we found some very good ones up here on a consistent basis. It's a partnership. It's a 2-way road. We want to look good for our customer, and we need great suppliers that can support us. That's the bottom line.
So that's all we had. Any questions? Yes.
Is there something? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Which one? You go ahead. I'll let you go. We're out of Erie, Pennsylvania. We have worked with Bechtel in many places. We were involved with Bechtel when they built the shell in China. We supplied all kinds of strainers and filters. Now you're down in Pittsburgh. How do we get in to see you people to let you know that we exist?
You got a business card?
Start with the business card with Justin. Justin's the guy to talk to. But all jokes aside, for anyone that hasn't done business with us, go to the Bechtel website. There's a very simplified registration for any vendor that hasn't worked. We do a lot of government projects, so it's often very, very strict as far as how we need to take bids from literally anybody that wants to register. So anyone can go register. The second round really is, as we go through evaluation, I can't say enough. Again, I'll speak very specifically from a logistics perspective. Well, 1,000 different trucking companies that will come and ask to do work with us. Some we recognize, some we don't. In a specific project, we're not going to talk specific projects, so in general terms, a specific project, our customer has given us an approved vendor list. We can ask all day to add other vendors. If they're not on that list, then there's a pretty good chance that they won't be in any of the bids. So I think that's why I mentioned twofold, understanding back to this lump sum jobs, where we have full choice into who we use, and we also have cost reimbursable jobs. And on those jobs, the vendor has the ultimate say, our customer, I'm sorry, has the ultimate say on which vendors are going to be included or excluded from those bids. Now, we're back to, so we don't just like lay down and take what they give us, we very early on, but sometimes it's 2 years in advance before the project's even released for FID, that those sort of lists are released. So I'd say you got to maintain the relationships, not with the Bechtels of the world, and as Justin mentioned earlier, we have 4 major global business units. So you may do a lot of work with infrastructure, but you haven't worked with OG&C. We may not be as familiar. You're in the system and everything else and registered, but we may not be familiar. So it's making sure that you're touching base with all 4 GBUs, and usually it's as Justin mentioned, start the relationship with one of them, grow from there, and then let them introduce you to the other business units. And we have security, so don't just show up. We've had a couple just show up, and I hate telling people no, but they won't let them in. So.
Is your office right there on the facilities?
We're not talking on specific projects, but if the project I think you're referring to, there's a few offices between Monaca and Aliquippa, so it's a function of who you want to meet with. But I'll speak generally. Any project site we go to, it's very strict from a security perspective, and very often field procurement people are down in the construction area. So even if if they wanted to come out and see somebody, there's no formal office per se. There are office trailers and things like that. But in the home offices, like in Houston and Reston, yes, they're very formal offices. And again, I was on that side of the desk before trying to sell services, and Bechtel is pretty good about not seeing people that just show up making cold calls.
That's Phil.
Yes.
Are there specific certifications that are required? Like, would you consider a company that's not ISO certified or not? I don't know, I'm just curious.
I wish there was a black and white answer, but there's not. So there's many different aspects of criteria that can be applicable. That's really a quality question, and we have quality engineers at all of our projects and offices, and that's their #1 focus, is making sure that, and obviously it is a key criteria in most cases for much of what we do in terms of a prime requirement.
I think just to answer from another perspective is, I alluded earlier that we want to be integrated more with engineering on the front end, right? So sometimes, I promised Justin I wasn't going to tell any bad jokes. How many engineers are in here? All right. Okay, I won't. Maybe I'll tell some more people later, but we're industrial engineers. I think they're imaginary engineers, but it refers back to the slinky. I'll tell you guys when we're not being recorded. No, the reality is sometimes we will get flow downs in orders that will be set by an engineer that has not spoken to us, right? And again, not a joke. I do believe this. Many engineers don't have a commercial bone in their body, right? They do not understand some of the other things, but they're technically awesome, right? So when they make requirements that don't make sense, I think it's prudent that we go back and talk to them and explain to them why do you want to have that in your specification if we even understand. And sometimes we have some junior guys that they don't know either. So they just follow what's been flowed down to them, and it just keeps rolling and rolling and rolling. We've had many initiatives, one specifically that's called Buy What They Make, right? And, I like metaphors, so I refer to like, a 2-liter bottle of soda, right? A 2-liter at the grocery store costs almost as much as the little small one you buy out of the vending machine, almost the same price. So if you're not sure if you need the little one or the big one, go buy the big one, right? And it'll cover all your requirements. For the little one, if you don't use it, you throw it away, okay? We have a lot of equipment that we over-engineer because we are an engineering company that doesn't need to be engineered, right? We could buy what they make. The complexity usually is working with our customers' engineers who've set some of those initial specifications and designs around what they wanted precisely. But we've done, and again, I mentioned Justin and I both went through an industrial engineering program. We've had probably a dozen people now back who've been through the same program. And in their capstone projects, we've produced many, many stories that said if you buy that same valve, exactly the way they make it, and you can use it with 80% of the facility, you're going to wipe around X amount of hundreds or thousands of engineering hours, right? So now maybe we pay a little bit more for it, but we wipe away the cost somewhere else. I think having those discussions with engineering is tough because again, they're not commercially minded, but that's usually part of it. And if there's a spec that we think needs to be in there that it's not, then again, having that conversation is key.
The other obvious benefit of keeping it simple is you can maintain a broader supply base. If you're asking for a bathtub that's made of nickel or titanium or a certain percentage of chromoly, you know, there's only going to be a certain number of people that can do that, just as an example. So it's kind of a win-win, internally and externally.
And I would say just one other tip maybe for manufacturers that want to be, you know, excessively competitive. You know, I call it the lunchbox example, right? Engineering allows for certain substitutions. They're technically approved substitutions in the drawings that we would give, right? But it usually isn't the other way around, right? The vendors don't come into engineering and say, hey, if you allow us to make these substitution options, depending on what our stock looks like and depending on what other work we're doing at the time, if you allow us to substitute a blue one for a red one, we'll actually charge you less. Or we won't charge you more even though the blue one is insulated and the red one you asked for isn't, right? Now, the reality is, and this is why I talk about global awareness, we've had many situations where the engineer gives a thumbs up, says, yep, that's awesome, now we have an insulated lunchbox, but now that insulated lunchbox carries a 10% duty where the other one was duty free. And it ends up costing procurement more money when we go to import the goods. So make sure you do your homework the whole way through the supply chain and not just that initial substitution, because in a situation like that, I think you could apply it to many situations. We start to lose trust with that vendor. Like, did they not know that there was a duty associated with it, or did they try to slide one by us, right? And it creates that doubt. So I would say just be mindful when we try to get creative to be more effective and more efficient and overall more productive, that it's not having some other downstream effect that would actually cause the relationship to be strained. You still have a question in the back?
I think you kind of answered it to me, but I was thinking when the best place for small businesses who are trying to do business with you would be your simplified registration, and there's a lot of information there. So you kind of answered most of my other part of my question.
Okay. Yeah, I would say get registered. It depends on what kind of equipment or service. You know, you want to try to reach out. I use Justin. You can use me for certain things to at least get you connected and have those evaluations done. I think we're probably better in some areas about keeping our our thoroughbreds kind of in the stable and the other ones kind of out in the field. But yeah, if there's an area where you think you're not, and again, I stress it, whether it's government work or something else, if you don't think you're getting that opportunity, you got to reach out and try to contact people.
I would say to kind of tie it all together with the overall theme of this forum is what was very interesting to me, and I'm still trying to get used to it. You know, in most of our projects where we operate around the world, we're in extremely remote places, extremely remote, whether it be Northwest Australia, Western Africa. In this region, it's a complete 180. I mean, there's, in my view, being in the Northeast, just as a general statement, there's obviously a lot of capability here, a lot of different options. So it's a complete 180 from what we're used to dealing with.
Any other questions? Good. Thank you.
thank you all for being here. I hope that it gave you a lot of information on where we need to be looking at going as a region, and that it is a regional effort. It comes down to we have this incredible opportunity. If we don't take it, whose fault is it? So it's kind of a challenge for all of you. Take this information out and share it. The PowerPoints will be on our hub website. It may take a week or so. We get the video also if you want to rerun that or show someone else. But the important thing is to get the word out and share it with as many people as possible, because we're still in a state of the majority of the population do not understand what this can mean to the entire region from Lake Erie down into West Virginia. It's not one state, it's not one municipality, it's the entire region. So on that note, we thank you for coming. There are cookies and bags for you to take with you at the back. So help yourself to that. And thanks for being here.